Other people are asking, has anyone ever tried to connect Maura's disappearance to the strange and bizarre disappearance of Felicia Thomas, which happened 2 days later? She literally vanished into thin air. It was close to where I live near State College, PA. The more I read about it, seems very odd, and I could somehow think Hugo Selensky could shed a lot of light on a lot of missing persons cases. People like him, Selensky, should be killed at birth. This is what a commenter is saying. It is very strange and just a possible theory. Total speculation, but all in all, it seems very, very likely that this girl, Maura, did in fact kill herself. Her suicide was probably planned before her Route 112 accident, but maybe not. Maybe just the getaway was planned and she wrecked and totally lost it and decided to leave this earth. And again, this is back, this is quite a few years ago now, before all of this new information has been available. Obviously, Maura Murray might not have even been in New Hampshire. So more discussion here. I don't think I've ever said anything negative about anything anyone has posted on here. I never said Maitland's case was solved, but police and certain PIs believe they know what happened. As for Maura Murray, I didn't realize her mom died on her birthday. That's so sad. I wonder if she killed herself. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. If nothing else, these cases of Bree and Maura make you want to hug your kids tonight and not get so mad at them for making trivial mistakes. I'm sure that is what haunts Fred Murray to this day, but I think he needs to let it go. I pray for him and hope that he can find peace someday. I talked to a woman near me who lives near me. Her daughter, Felicia Thomas, vanished 2 days after Maura Murray. She is a mess. Her family has been destroyed because of this. All things point to foul play and drugs. No one deserves this. No one. I don't care if a person my age made some bad choices with drugs and hanging around the bad crowd. They still don't deserve this. Keep the topics alive. Never stop asking questions. Could Maura Murray have been abducted by an alien spacecraft? Stranger things have happened. I wouldn't rule anything out. Okay. So we'll get a little bit more interesting here. So people were speculating that Felicia Thomas and Maura Murray had a mutual acquaintance. I don't know if there's anything to this. Of course, State College is not far. There was that other missing individual from State College. People in colleges know other people in colleges and drive around to other colleges and party. Of course, that is known and not surprising. Now, whether or not there are definitive links here with Maura Murray, I am not alleging that. There's just online speculation of that. Now, here where it's getting interesting, supposedly that area of Pennsylvania is not far from where a certain person of interest in the Maura Murray case had owned some land. And this person of interest at the time was being discussed as Rick Forcier for the land that he owned in Pennsylvania. Apparently, other people were saying that there was another individual who also had land in Pennsylvania. All of this, of course, rumor mill. I'm not alleging any of this is true or untrue. And, of course, people in New Hampshire might have land in Pennsylvania as well. That doesn't mean they're murderers, doesn't mean any of these things. But, of course, pouring concrete in the winter within days after someone goes missing. That is curious, especially if 2 to 3 people were doing this in the case of Maura Murray. But it's quite bizarre. So obviously there's nothing incredibly direct to link these two cases, but just how similar they look to each other, how similar people describe them. It's just, it's bizarre. And obviously all these cases should be covered anyway, but I'm going to be moving on to other missing persons directly in the Haverhill area now. And there are quite a few. This is an article from the Caledonian Record, May 31st, 2004. Another Vermont woman reported missing. Police find her Jeep, by Gary E. Lindsley, who is, of course, a very dubious source, but we'll continue with the article here. Lemoyne County authorities are asking for the public's help in finding a 35-year-old Johnson woman who hasn't been seen since Thursday morning. The third woman to disappear in northern New England since February 9th. Jody Whitney, who has a 3-year-old child, was last seen by her husband Edgar before he left for work Thursday morning. She not only failed to show up for work at Stowflake Resort in Stowe, but she also did not return home. Stowe, Vermont was, of course, a place Maura Murray allegedly called. or her phone made a call when she was allegedly looking for places to stay. Like the other women who are missing, Whitney is described as a petite woman. On February 9th, 21-year-old University of Massachusetts at Amherst nursing student Maura Murray disappeared after she was involved in a minor one-car accident on Route 112 in the town of Haverhill, New Hampshire. Of course, later the New Hampshire League of Investigators and Frank Kelly, all of them, they found that it was a staged accident and all these things, but we won't get into that now. A little more than a month later, 17-year-old Brianna Maitland of Sheldon, Vermont, disappeared after she left work at the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery late the night of March 19th. Maitland's vehicle was found about a mile from the Black Lantern Inn, partially ensconced inside an abandoned building. Sheriff Roger Marcoux said Whitney's white Jeep Cherokee was found within a 5-mile residence of her home by a citizen Friday afternoon. Marcoux is not releasing where the vehicle was found because it's part of the ongoing investigation. He said the vehicle is being looked at by Vermont State Police Crime Lab. Kelly Maitland, Brianna's mother, was heartbroken to learn another woman had disappeared. I believe it's the work of a serial killer, Maitland said, and the clock is ticking. One is too many, she went to say. Enough is enough. They, law enforcement, should pull out all the stops. Marcoux said there isn't anything to lead investigators to believe there is any connection between Whitney's disappearance and the disappearances of Maitland and Murray. We have no evidence to tie them together at this point, he said. Marcoux said police are conducting a missing persons investigation into Whitney's disappearance because nothing so far has indicated a criminal act has been committed. He said Whitney is a reservation supervisor at Snowflake Resort. She was supposed to be at work at 8 a.m. When she had not returned home by 10 p.m. Thursday, her husband reported her missing. This is very out of character for her, Marcoux said. She seemed to be a very responsible person. She has a 3-year-old child at home. Co-workers and members of Whitney's family have been interviewed, he said. Everything seemed fine, Marcoux said, referring to Thursday morning when Whitney's husband last saw her. Investigators are tracking down some leads. One, according to Marcoux, came from officials at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. They reported they had a woman in the hospital possibly fitting Whitney's description. Investigators went down to Dartmouth, but the woman was not Whitney. Marcoux said about 50 law enforcement officers and the New England Canine Team, led by Vermont State Police Search and Rescue, conducted a ground search Saturday of an area consisting of a 1-mile radius of where Whitney's vehicle was found. That search area was expanded, but nothing was found. An aerial search was conducted Sunday. Authorities also searched about 3 miles of the Gihon River. Whitney is described as 5'3", weighing 110 pounds. She had shoulder-length brown hair and brown eyes. And the update on this case here came March 16th, 2006. 2 years later, Whitney admits killing his wife. Plea bargain could mean 25 years to life. Edgar Whitney Jr., in a series of relaxed, declarative yes responses, admitted in court last week that he strangled his wife and hid her body in a nearby marsh. He did this while their 3-year-old daughter slept in bed at their home in Johnson. Whitney, 35, pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder and a new felony charge of unauthorized removal of a dead body. Jody Whitney was found dead in June 2004, and until last week, her husband had claimed innocence. Whitney had been charged with first-degree murder. A plea bargain reduced that to second degree, a slightly lesser charge. With the deal, the prosecution avoids the risk of a trial while Whitney forgoes appeals and other rights. He'll likely be sentenced later this year. Whitney was reported missing by Edgar Whitney on May 27, 2004. Police found her Jeep parked behind a nearby barn. Edgar Whitney cooperated with the authorities and didn't emerge as a top suspect at first. That all changed a week later, June 2nd. Police planned to conduct a polygraph test on Whitney that day, but learned he was in Copley Hospital in Morrisville being treated for an apparent suicide attempt. He had overdosed on 150 Tylenol PM pills. He confessed to both his brother and police that day he'd murdered his wife. He waited for Monica to go to sleep. In bed, he struck Jody on the head with his hands and then strangled her. As he watched his wife breathe her last, Whitney said he was thinking about covering up the killing and spending as much time with Monica as I could. I knew my life was over when I took hers, he told the psychiatrist. He wrapped the body in a sheet, put it in the back of the Jeep, and drove to an abandoned talc mine near their home in Johnson. After hiding the body in Marshland, Whitney told police he left the Jeep, hid the keys, bought some beer and ice cream, and walked home. I covered up what I did, he told the psychiatrist. I hid the body, went to work the next day. It's not a good feeling. I took Monica to the daycare. I still didn't really care much. I knew I had to get Monica into a safe place. Okay, so again, important to note here, when people harm others, it's very, very common to stage their vehicle. Nothing new. I don't know why the steers and the obfuscators get so triggered when people even suggest the remote possibility that Murray's vehicle might have been staged, even though, again, New Hampshire League of Investigators, multiple different accident reconstruction experts all concluded that so-called accident scene was staged. And Edgar Whitney got his maximum sentence Tuesday, 23 years to life. So some people on the case have threw in some numerology here. So Maura Murray, February 9th, 2004. Brianna Maitland, March 19th, 2004. Jody Whitney, May 27th, 2004. So there's 40 days between Murray and Maitland. 70 days between Brianna and Jody. And between the disappearance of Brianna and Jody is exactly 2 months and 9 days, 209, the date of the disappearance of Maura Murray. And between Maura and Jody is exactly 3 months and 19 days, which is Brianna Maitland's disappearance, March 19th, 319. So, yeah, it's just, it's... Again, not to say that this individual who murdered his wife was responsible in any way, just that there might be something weird going on. Now, regarding the Brianna Maitland case, that was covered on MINDSHOCK as well. If you haven't checked that out, you can check out the Brianna Maitland case. That case, I believe, even though there's a lot of similarities, again, these abandoned vehicles being found without the individual present, Brianna Maitland there was a circle of friends she was involved with. A lot of them were drug dealers. She left that group to move on in life, and coincidentally at that point she disappeared. So it's a lot more clear in that area. But yeah, these areas were areas that Maura Murray was apparently calling to go to. So it is a little bit eerie, and so there's similar circumstances of these 3 brown-haired women with these vehicles found abandoned. So there was the Weathered Barn at the Weathered Barn corner where Maura Murray's vehicle was found. There was a house, barn, farm area where Maitland was found. Jody's vehicle was found behind a barn. This is an approximate 75-mile radius of all of these things going on. Okay, other crimes and disappearances here. Nathan Curry's remains were found within a mile of where he left was an abandoned car in a cemetery in Charleston, Vermont. This was, he went missing in 2006. Apparently, Brianna Maitland's mom also stated that the Vermont State Police were looking into Brianna Maitland's and Nathan Curry's disappearance as possibly being related. Some people believe that both Brianna and Nathan Curry's disappearances were gang-related. So here's an article in the Rutland Herald. This was originally published December 5th, 2008, updated October 17th, 2018, 10 years later. Teenager's Death Still a Mystery by Lisa Rathke, The Associated Press. Charleston, the discovery of skeletal remains in a swampy area last week helped solve a long-running missing persons case in northern Vermont. But it doesn't explain what happened to 18-year-old Nathan Curry. The bones were found by a hunter about a mile from where Curry's car was discovered abandoned at a West Charleston cemetery in July of 2006. On Wednesday, the state's chief medical examiner's office confirmed they were Curry. After he disappeared, police scoured the area near the cemetery on foot with dogs and did aerial searches, and the family organized other searches, including of the field and cedar swamp where the remains were discovered, but found nothing, said Vermont State Police Detective Lieutenant J.P. Sinclair. The family had been down through that area. They had a lot of people in town helping them, Sinclair said Thursday. But again, that's thick swampland. Unless you're in the right place at the right time, looking at the right angle, it would be very easy to miss. Wednesday's news that the remains were those of the young man brought some comfort to his family, Sinclair said. It is a degree of closure for them, but there's still questions that linger in the air. But at least it gives them something, he said. They can have the finality and the ability to honor their son, have services, and that's huge for them. The discovery also narrows the police investigation, which remains open, he said. Although the medical examiner's office didn't find anything to reveal how and why Curry died, experts will continue to analyze the remains, Sinclair said. No clothes were found with the remains, he said. Since Curry's disappearance was over 2 years ago, police have received many leads about the case, but how and why he died remain unknown, Sinclair said. Right up until the day he was found on Friday, we were still looking at a number of different angles in the case, he said. Some of these roads we were going down were clearly not right, and we can instantly push them aside now, and it really helps with the focus. On Thursday, people in the small rural community, many who know the family, didn't want to comment on Curry's death. I was hoping the kid just ran away, said Matthew White, 15. At the East Charleston store, clerk Kathy McIntyre said the discovery of the remains gave the family some closure. He's no longer missing, she said, but many wonder if police would ever find out how he died. I hate to think of that possibility, Sinclair said. We will always keep this case open until we come to the answers. That's the only time we will close out investigations like this. The Currys did not return a phone call seeking comment. And on the Charlie Project, details of the disappearance missing since July 23, 2006, West Charleston, Vermont. And he was 18 at the time. Curry disappeared from West Charleston, Vermont, July 23, 2006. In December 2008, a hunter found his skeletal remains in the woods near where he was last seen. That is very, very strange. Curry's death is under investigation. An autopsy didn't reveal the cause or manner of death. But police are treating his case as a homicide, which is also interesting. So here's a post on Reddit on the Brianna Maitland subreddit. Link between Brianna Maitland and Nathan Curry. I've been aware of cases of Brianna and Nathan for years, but just recently made a connection that they were both active crack cocaine users in the Northeast Kingdom, the most rural area in Vermont, comprised of the 3 most northeastern counties. In that area, many towns send their kids to the same central high school, and it's common for everyone to know everyone else, even if you are from several towns away. Nathan lived and disappeared from West Charleston, about 1 hour away from Montgomery, only 2 years after Brianna. I can't find any information linking the two cases at all, but I feel like if there was foul play involving the buying and selling of crack, it's entirely possible they were targeted by the same person or people. Nathan's body was found in 2008, but the murder has never been solved. Would love to hear your thoughts. So there's, of course, these are rumors that they were drug users and whatnot. And also, I will postulate this. Let's say the same people are not responsible for their deaths, but they might know each other. And that's where cases can be related by orders of degrees, because if criminals, not necessarily bragging, although it could be bragging as well, I mean, these criminal-minded murderers, they might be discussing notches on their count, notches and whatnot. They might know of others who killed, or at least who was rumored, that could lead to some investigation. Someone commented here, I am from the area. My understanding is that Brianna Maitland went to Enosburg and not NC where Nathan went. I was just discussing this all with my mom tonight. Thanks for making the connection. It's possible that people don't go over J Peak, especially with all the border patrol. Also, technically, Brianna Maitland was not from the Northeastern Kingdom, as that is a different county than Orleans, Essex, and Caledonia. I would see the Ennisburg people heading to St. Albans before Newport, if that makes sense as far as cities go, but really interesting connection. From other discussion on other boards, the cases were looked at and authorities think there is no link. And regarding just some background info on Curry, which there actually is not a lot of information. This was an article July 21st, 2007 by Daphne Larkin, Times Argus. 1 year after Nathan Curry disappeared from his home in far northern Vermont, police say they are still looking for the young man and have followed up many leads, but would still like more information from the public. I've personally worked on this case almost every day since it came to us, said Vermont State Police Detective Sergeant Jason Letourneau. This case is still active and we're still working on it. Police said Curry, then 18, was last seen in the Dane Hill area of West Charleston on July 23, 2006. Wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, he is 6 feet tall, weighs 170 pounds. His car, a blue Chevy sedan, was found at a nearby cemetery with the keys in it, according to police. Curry's family told reporters a year ago that their son's girlfriend broke up with him and he turned to drugs. Asked last year what his son was last seen doing, his father, Michael Curry, reported bluntly, crack cocaine. I didn't have a clue they had that expletive here. Police will not comment about Curry's alleged drug use, but said they are investigating all possibilities. We're still investigating foul play, Letourneau said. We definitely have hope we're going to be able to locate him, but it's a two-part case. It's one thing to locate him, it's another thing to show and prove what caused the disappearance. Police initially searched by land, air, and water using canine units, helicopters, and scuba divers. Curry reportedly lived with his family until the beginning of July 2006 when he moved into an apartment. Friends and family said Curry, who worked for his uncle, never stayed away more than a day. Police said that they thank the public for all the help they have given in this case and that they can still use more. We want to remind everyone we are still actively working on the case and we've made a great deal of progress, Letourneau said. Letourneau urged anyone with information, however trivial it may seem, to share it with police. Even if they don't think it's important, give us a call and let us evaluate it because it might fit with other information we have, he said. So there's a little bit of backstory there. Obviously, this case has not been covered as much as others. I don't know if people just think that this was a drug user teen, so he doesn't deserve justice as much. It's rough because, these are basically kids. Some bad choices in life does not mean you don't need to have justice. It's just really, really sad that some people think that. So someone we haven't talked about, I don't believe, is Dr. Godwin. So Dr. Maurice Godwin is involved in criminal investigative forensic science and behavioral science. He's the president of Godwin Trial and Forensic Consultancy, PhD with a concentration in investigative psychology, MS Forensic Science, MS Criminology, BS Behavioral Science, AS Criminal Justice Technology. And he's written numerous books as well. And an excerpt here from, this is a press release for Tracker Hunting Down Serial Killers, Dr. Maurice Godwin with Fred Rosen. Tracker presents former police officer Maurice Godwin as method of psychological and geographical profiling, which is revolutionizing the way police track and capture serial killers. In Tracker, we learned that Godwin's work is based on the collection and critical analysis of over 100,000 data points and 200 different crime scene actions that could be used to profile a killer. Godwin explains, instead of relying on interviews with murderers, I studied specific pieces of behavioral information available from the crime scene or case to develop a psychological profile of the killer and to pinpoint where he lives. As Godwin further states, I'm more interested in getting in the killer's shoes rather than his mind. Okay, so in relation to the Breonna Maitland case, Dr. Godwin has stated that the person responsible for Breonna's disappearance was someone who knew her. Again, this coincides with FBI statistics. Godwin stated that the person responsible for Maura Murray's disappearance was a stranger who had done it before and will do it again. Supposedly, Weeper, aka Frank Kelly, confirmed this statement from Dr. Godwin. However, it's unknown whether Godwin was working with assumptions like Maura Murray was actually at the staged accident scene, or where in time, whether it was established that it was staged and Maura Murray was even there, of course, because if she disappeared from UMass, then that throws that out the window. There are also some other curious coincidences, we could call them. So we have Pauline Clark, Audrey Grote, Pamela Webb, and Louise Chaput went missing or were found murdered near the Weathern Barn Corner in the approximate vicinity. Pauline Clark was found 1 month later within yards from the A-frame. And it's actually kind of hard to find information on Pauline Clark. There were some forum posts from back in 2005-ish that there were at least a dozen unsolved murders in the area over the previous 20 years. One woman, Pauline Clark, was found in a very small brook drowned. And as the crow flies, for all intents and purposes, less than a mile apart from the Weathered Barn Corner. Audrey Grote's case is a curious one as well, from the Charlie Project. She's been missing since August 21st, 1993, from Montpelier, Vermont. 41 years old at the time, 5'6", 120 pounds, Caucasian female, blonde hair, blue eyes, scar on her right knee. Investigating agency, the Vermont State Police. Grote was last seen in Montpelier, Vermont on August 21st, 1993. She spent time shopping and drinking beer with her boyfriend. Then he dropped her off at a park and ride commuter lot at 10 p.m. so she could get her pickup truck. Grote has never been heard from again, and her truck was found at the park and ride after her disappearance with the keys locked inside. Her purse was in the bushes nearby. She left 6 daughters behind. 4 of them were under 18 and still lived at home. Grote's boyfriend was at one time considered the prime suspect in her disappearance. He admitted having sex with a minor relative of hers and was convicted of lewd and lascivious conduct in connection with this, but he denies any involvement in Grote's disappearance. He is no longer the focus of the investigation. Several searches for Grote's remains have been conducted over the years, but no evidence has been located. She resided in Northfield, Vermont in 1993, and some agencies state she disappeared from there. Grote was declared legally dead sometime after her disappearance and has a gravestone in a cemetery in Middletown, Connecticut, where she grew up. Her daughters describe her as a dedicated mother who worked hard to provide for her family. Foul play is suspected in her case, and she is presumed to be deceased. So from Vermont State Police website, it states that there were reports that human bones were discovered May 2012 at a construction site near where Audrey may have been, led to an additional search of the area. The remains found appeared to be over 50 years old, and it does not appear that they are of Audrey Grote. There are no further leads to the whereabouts of Audrey. That's really weird. Can't they definitively rule her out? This is on an official government website saying they appeared, they do not appear. Can you actually test the bones? I mean, what's going on? So this was also posted on Unresolved Mysteries, and there were articles stating that over 20 investigators interviewed several people of interest since her disappearance, but no arrests were ever made. In 2001, the Wrightsville Reservoir was drained on a tip that her body might be dumped there. Another tip in 2009 led police to conduct a search of a wooded area near the commuter lot. An investigator explained that a tipster had seen something that didn't look right to them, and it was brought to our attention based on their knowledge of the case. Nothing was found in either search. And then, of course, in 2012 is the Bones situation, where there's nothing conclusive. One of Grote's daughters believes that the boyfriend is responsible and that he and Grote had some kind of confrontation the day of her disappearance. Some common theories, some theories here. If the boyfriend didn't do it, here's a scenario I can imagine. Gets dropped off before she realizes her keys aren't in her purse. Boyfriend drives away. She isn't going to have a cell phone because it's 1993, although there were cell phones for rich people. So maybe she waits and someone comes along. She asks for help and is abducted. The purse in the bushes could be the result of her struggling, or the abductor could have thrown it there for some reason. Boyfriend seems more likely. He has a motive. If he was molesting a child, she may have found out. Killing someone to avoid prison is a pretty good motive. And of course, it seems like investigators really, really focused on him and then for whatever reason stopped. Apparently the keys were locked in the vehicle. So did she not know that at the time? And then some people, of course, theorizing, did she make it into her vehicle? And then something happened. And I mean, again, we don't know. People believe the police have a lot more information than they are revealing. And Patrick L. Jarvis was actually named by newspapers in newspaper articles at the time as the boyfriend and the one who was guilty of this sexual assault. So in an article here from Times Argus, from the originally posted April 29th, 2009, updated October 30th, 2018. Police renew search in the disappearance of Audrey Grote, missing since 1993. After nearly 16 years, Audrey Grote's disappearance remains a mystery to police, her family, and her friends. A rare search Tuesday in a wooded area in Montpelier near where her abandoned truck was found years ago turned up no new evidence or clues in her disappearance. Grote was a 41-year-old mother of 6 and a Northfield resident when she went missing August 21st, 1993. She was reportedly last seen in Middlesex near the Wrightsville Reservoir, and her truck was found at the Park and Ride in Montpelier. So reportedly, so are these not definitive sightings, so nobody really knows where she was? So the only real information is where her truck was found. Interesting. And it just goes on to talk about search dogs and search teams that found nothing of interest, and larger sections of woods that had already been searched. But they keep focusing on areas that weren't specifically searched. And they got a tip in November. They would not say what the tipster had seen in the woods, but the tip was in November. But investigators decided to let the snow melt before bringing in the search team. See, this is a mistake because, again, with the snow melts, depending on the currents of, when the snow turns to liquid, it could get carried. So whatever was spotted perhaps wasn't there, or animals could have moved it. Who knows? You don't ever delay searches. That's kind of messed up. That might have been the break in the case. The last major search was in 2001 when police drained the Wrightsville Reservoir as they searched for Grote's remains, an effort that also revealed nothing. Every August 21st, Grote's friends and family members gather at the Park and Ride where police found Grote's truck soon after she was reported missing, Cote said. That's when she did not show up to pick up her kid, or did not show up to the babysitter. Okay. Leto believes the information to solve the mysterious disappearance exists. There's someone out there who knows something, and for whatever reason, they haven't come forward, he said. We're hoping that they do. So then we also have Pamela Webb. This is an unsolved homicide from 1989, Franconia. This is from NewHampshire.gov, Department of Justice. Pamela Webb, age 32, of Winthrop, Maine, was reported missing July 1st, 1989. She was last seen wearing a denim skirt, sweater, and possibly moccasins. Pamela was on her way to see her boyfriend in Mason, New Hampshire, when she disappeared. Her 1981 blue Chevy pickup truck was found on the side of the road in the southbound lane of I-95 in Biddeford, Maine. There were signs of a struggle near the truck. Her skeletal remains were discovered in the woods off Route 3 in Franconia, New Hampshire on July 18th, 1989. So she was reported missing the 1st, and on the 18th, her remains were discovered. The medical examiner concluded that her death was the result of homicidal violence of an unspecified nature. Okay, and John Smith actually has a post here on his blog, Truth Seeker Investigations, search for more.wordpress.com. And he's got a grouping of news clippings here. July 7th, 1989, search for missing woman hits snag. State police were having trouble determining whether blood found near a missing Winthrop woman's pickup truck came from the woman. And keep in mind, this is 1989. Who is believed to have been abducted over the holiday weekend, a spokesman said Thursday evening. We have been unable to find her blood type, said Department of Public Safety spokesman Stephen McLaughlin. Detectives have been examining the blood at the state crime laboratory in Augusta, but they were unable to determine through the medical records of Pamela J. Webb what her blood type was. Miss Webb, 32, has been missing since late Saturday or early Sunday. She left on the Marine Turnpike Saturday night to visit a boyfriend in New Hampshire, but never showed up. After the boyfriend reported her missing, authorities located her pickup, which had a flat tire, parked off the turnpike near Biddeford. Evidence at the scene included blood, led police to believe there had been a struggle and the woman had been abducted. Police have scoured the area with tracking dogs and a helicopter, but found no traces of Miss Webb. And follow-up article by Marilyn Hackett here. The body of a woman found in a wooded area off Route 3 in Franconia on Tuesday has been identified as that of Pamela J. Webb, the 32-year-old Winthrop woman who had disappeared from the Maine Turnpike July 1st, a spokesman for the Maine State Police said early Thursday. New Hampshire authorities have ruled her death a homicide, according to the spokesman, Stephen McLaughlin. Maine and New Hampshire State Police are investigating the case, but have no suspects, he said. Webb was identified from dental records late Wednesday night, said McLaughlin. Her badly decomposed body was found by a passerby shortly after 5 p.m. Tuesday. Several articles of clothing at the scene helped identify the woman, McLaughlin said. Webb was reported missing after she failed to arrive as planned at her boyfriend's home in Mason, New Hampshire. July 1st, her pickup truck, which had a flat tire, was found on the turnpike in Biddeford by a Maine state trooper the next morning. There were 2 pools of blood and signs of a struggle beside the vehicle, police said. Her dog and pocketbook were found inside the truck. Police had no idea where Webb had been since July 1st, McLaughlin said. An autopsy would be performed, he said, but he wasn't sure when. Another article here from July 26, 1989. Mourners packed church for Pamela Webb funeral. Josh Cloud was her boyfriend, the last to leave the burial site of the homicide victim after her funeral in Winthrop on Tuesday. Webb was en route to visit Cloud, her boyfriend, when she disappeared from the side of the Maine Turnpike July 1st. Hundreds of mourners filled the largest church in this central Maine town Tuesday to pay their last respects to Pamela Webb, the victim of an unsolved homicide whose body was found in New Hampshire more than 2 weeks after her abandoned pickup truck was found on the Maine Turnpike. The Reverend Glenn Metzler, pastor of the old Mennonite church that the 32-year-old woman attended, told about 500 people gathered for the funeral Pam knew God personally, adding that he wasn't surprised that police found the woman's Bible among her personal effects in the vehicle. That's Pam. She knew her Bible well. And now imprinted in my mind is the picture of her Bible lying on the truck seat, Metzler said. That to me is a symbol we should take comfort from God's love, as Pam did. Metzler said that he heard Pamela's sister say if Pam were here, she probably would forgive her abductor. And I believe that to be true, Metzler said. Webb disappeared July 1st from the side of the main turnpike, where investigators presume she was changing a flat tire on a pickup truck. See, this has a lot more signs of a crime of opportunity than, for example, the Maura Murray case, which has 1,001 coincidences, anomalies, and various bizarre oddities. Her personal belongings were untouched, but police found signs of a struggle outside the vehicle. Blood was found on the pavement, but crime specialists have been unable to conclusively establish it was hers. Her body was found 17 days later in a wooded area off Route 3 in Franconia Notch, New Hampshire. An autopsy failed to establish the cause of death. Investigators say they have a few leads in the case, but they are analyzing evidence seized by Vermont officials from Randolph Jacobetz, 30, a Vermont trucker accused of a highway kidnapping and rape in that state. We're trying to determine if it has any relevance whatsoever to this case, Department of Public Safety spokesman Stephen McCausland said. Before the service, the victim's mother explained that the funeral was held at St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church in anticipation of a large turnout. Okay, a couple other religious things there. So those are the articles, and John Smith here has a map posted on his blog here. Quotes here, the Webbs have alleged the following. Haas was a Maine State Police trooper assigned to patrol the turnpike. On July 1st, 1989, Haas went on duty at 11 p.m., entered the turnpike in gray, and drove south. At approximately 11:35 p.m., he observed a disabled pickup in the southbound breakdown lane near mile 30 in Biddeford. Haas did not see anyone around the vehicle and observed that the truck had a flat tire, a spare tire was on the pavement, and the truck's tailgate was down. Haas did not stop but proceeded south to the York toll booth. He remained there for approximately an hour and 15 minutes. Thereafter, Haas drove north and again observed the disabled pickup. He did not observe anything different and again did not stop. Eventually, at 2:30 a.m., he stopped and conducted an inspection of the pickup. He filled out a patrol check card, which is used to mark and identify disabled vehicles. Haas did not order the vehicle to be towed because there was a dog in it. On July 2nd, 1989, blood was found near the pickup and earrings were found ground into the gravel nearby. The state police suspected that the driver may have been abducted. At a meeting with his night supervisor the next evening, Haas denied seeing the vehicle when he passed by the site at approximately 11:35 p.m. the previous night. The state police subsequently opened an investigation into the disappearance of Pamela Webb, but Haas did not tell the investigators that he actually first saw her truck at 11:35 p.m. on the night of July 1st. And we can see here how egos and people afraid of losing their jobs or whatever, being looked at as an incompetent, can really impede the investigation in a lot of cases. On approximately July 18th, 1989, the body of Pamela Webb was found in the woods of New Hampshire. It was determined that Webb had been the driver of the pickup and she had been murdered. In September 1989, Haas admitted that he first observed the pickup at 11:35 p.m. Haas was instructed to complete a report on the incident, and in the report, Haas incorrectly stated that he had stopped, checked the pickup, and filled out a patrol check card at 11:35 p.m. He also gave the investigators a falsified patrol check card stating that he inspected the vehicle at 11:35 p.m. On October 11th, 1989, Haas admitted for the first time that he did not stop at 11:35 p.m. on the night of July 1st, and he did not inspect Webb's truck until 2:30 a.m. on July 2nd. He also admitted that the patrol check card he submitted in September had been falsified. Haas was dismissed from the state police effective November 20th, 1989 for the falsification of official state police records and for his untruthfulness during the investigation of the disappearance and murder of Pamela Webb. From July 2nd, 1989 until February 7th, 1992, the Webbs had continuing contact with the state police. On February 7th, 1992, a member of the state police called Mrs. Webb to tell her about an article concerning Haas's dismissal that was expected to be published the next day in the Kennebec Journal. This was the first time the Webbs had learned that Haas had been fired or that he had been suspected of wrongdoing. Thereafter, the Webbs filed a formal notice of claim pursuant to the act, and on June 30th, 1992, they filed this action against Haas, the state of Maine, and the Turnpike Authority. The trial court subsequently granted Haas's motion for a stay of discovery. Okay. And John Smith has compiled a list of articles here regarding Pamela Webb. 1994, Maine investigators are trying to find out whether a trucker convicted of murdering a runaway from Maine may have been involved in the death of another Maine woman 5 years ago. James Robert Cruz Jr. was convicted by a Pennsylvania jury this week of murdering a 17-year-old girl missing from the Elon School boarding home in Poland. Cruz, 36, of New Waterford, Ohio, was sentenced to life in prison. Authorities are investigating whether Cruz was involved in the deaths of dozens of other females whose bodies have turned up alongside remote sections of interstate highways in the East and Midwest since the mid-1980s. Maine State Police want to know whether Cruz was in Maine on July 1st, 1989, when Pamela Webb of Winthrop was abducted after her pickup truck broke down on the Maine Turnpike near the Biddeford exit. The body of the 32-year-old woman was found in New Hampshire 3 weeks later. Yes, we are looking at him, and I don't want to create any false hope because we have looked at many others and come to dead ends in the past 5 years, said State Police Public Safety Department spokesman Stephen McCausland. He said there's no evidence linking Cruz to the Webb slaying. The cause of her death has never been determined. I would not label him as a suspect or a possible suspect. We have come up with nothing to bring him to Maine so far, but that doesn't mean we'll stop trying, McCausland said. State police are seeking help from the FBI and Pennsylvania authorities in reviewing potential evidence in the Webb case, including his driving logs, toll tickets, or anything that might show where he was in early July 1989. Again, completely different reaction than Haverhill Police. John Smith goes on to say here, Lincor Environmental LLC does business in New Hampshire. They do business with Jetstar Auto Salvage on Route 10 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. So thought I would toss the info in below. I'm not saying there is a connection, but I will say the place Pamela's body was found would have been on the route used by Jetstar Trucking. A former employee of Jetstar, Claude Moulton, is a long-haul trucker that delivered to Lincor in Sanford, Maine. Both Jetstar and Lincor are salvage recycling yards, car crushers, and both have had environmental issues. Jetstar was run by Dan Marsh, and the business had several issues with the town, and the employees there are sketchy to say the least. Because of past environmental indiscretions, Lincor Environmental is required to notify the DEP when they set up to crush cars at a given junkyard. Who killed Pamela Webb in July of 1989? Who dumped Pamela's body just a few miles from the Old Man of the Mountains? Does tourism have a big influence on what is released by law enforcement and the media? New Hampshire is a tourism state, and if law enforcement and the media were to state the actual truth, it could affect the tourism industry in New Hampshire. Does sugarcoating and masking the truth in an attempt to hide the possible implications in the end actually really only affect the cases being solved? Remember what Sergeant Charles West of the New Hampshire State Police Troop F stated to the Murrays about Maura and Patrick McCarthy? Why do you people from Massachusetts keep coming up here and getting lost? Talk about an insensitive, unprofessional thing to say to a grieving family. Rest in peace, Pamela Webb, Patrick McCarthy, and so many more that have been let down by the powers that be to bring justice to their cases. Absolutely disgusting and disturbing. This is being worked on by several people and is concentrating on the Connecticut River Valley killers. The contents of this letter will be posted soon. And people posted here on John Smith's blog, apparently Claude Moulton had a roommate that ended up dead as well. Next, we'll take a look at Louise Chaput, the 2001 unsolved homicide. This happened in Pinkham Notch. Louise Chaput, age 52, was last seen on November 15th, 2001. She was reported missing on November 20th, 2001 by family when she failed to return from a scheduled hiking trip in Pinkham Notch. Her body was found November 22nd, 2001 in the vicinity of the Glen Ellis Falls parking lot at Pinkham Notch. An autopsy ruled that her death was a homicide as a result of multiple stab wounds. This is from Department of Justice, New Hampshire.gov. And next we'll go into WMUR article. This was updated December 5th, 2019. New Hampshire unsolved case file. Who killed Louise Chaput? 2001 fatal stabbing of Canadian hiker in Pinkham Notch remains unsolved. On November 15th, 2001, Louise Chaput, 52, drove from Sherbrooke, Quebec, Canada. And coincidentally, that's where sightings of Maura Murray or reports of Maura Murray living came from. Where she had been reserved a room at the Joe Dodge Lodge at Appalachian Mountain Club Visitor Center for a long weekend in the mountains. Chaput loved the outdoors and hiking and was particularly fond of the Mount Washington Valley. I tell her, be safe and don't make things dangerous. And she tells me, no, don't be afraid, I will be okay. And if I'm not coming back Monday, you can call the police. But that was a joke, her daughter Corinne told WMUR in 2004. With daylight fading when she arrived at 3 p.m., Chaput asked an AMC worker at the Pinkham Notch Visitor Center for directions to a short hike that would get her back before dusk. The clerk suggested a short walk around Lost Pond Trail, which began just across the street from the lodge. Chaput was never seen alive again. When she failed to return home the following Monday, friends and family called police to report her missing. Authorities found Chaput's car parked at the Diratissima trailhead across the street from the Lost Pond trailhead. Police said they believe someone stole the keys to the car, but not the car itself. They said the larger of two backpacks Chaput had with her was gone, but her hiking shoes along with her water and chocolate, two things she always took hiking with her, were still in the car. Her body was found with multiple stab wounds on Thanksgiving Day, a short distance off the Glen Boulder Trail. I was thinking it was like a bad dream or something like that because for me it was not reality, her daughter said. Police told WMUR in 2004 that Chaput was hiking on the Glen Boulder Trail, but whomever killed her forced her off the trail and brought her down into a clearing about 100 yards away. Her death was ruled homicide. Officials said all evidence indicates that the attack was random and the killer was likely someone from the area whom Chaput didn't know. While investigators said 10 years after Chaput's death that the case had direction, they have never been able to identify her killer. Friends and family members returned to the area where Chaput was killed every year. They said they couldn't think of anyone who liked life more than Chaput, and you would want to know what happened to her. I think in English the term is closure, which we don't have in French, is very appropriate. It's, you never get your friend back, but at least you know what happened, Chaput's friend Dennis Masson said. Okay, so that's kind of weird. Investigators are saying she was already hiking and forced off the trail. However, supposedly her hiking shoes and water and chocolate were still in the car. Huh. I guess unless she thought she was going to make such a short hike that she didn't even need water. Or hiking shoes? In a potentially dangerous area. So this is an article on medium.com, True Crime Murder on Mount Isolation. It was written by Lisa Marie Fuqua, September 21st, 2019. Are the deaths of Louise Chaput, Maura Murray, and Brianna Maitland connected? Or are they just three more unexplained mysteries that happened in the Appalachian? Louise Chaput was a 52-year-old self-employed psychologist who enjoyed hiking. Sometimes she would go with a friend, but it wasn't unusual for her to pack up her gear and hike by herself, disappearing into the woods for days to hike and take in nature. On November 15, 2001, she planned one of these adventures, leaving her home in Sherbrooke, Quebec, Canada, and making the drive to America. On this solo trip, she planned to climb Mount Washington, which she had climbed before. She was an avid hiker and no stranger to taking care of herself in the woods. Very interesting. Her last known day is documented with her crossing the U.S.-Canadian border in Norton, Vermont at 11:45 a.m. Shortly after, at 12:50 p.m., a receipt would later be found in her car showed that she had made a purchase at the Pickwick in Colebrook. The last that anyone had admitted to seeing Louise was 3 p.m., in Pinkham Grant, New Hampshire. She had gone into the Appalachian Mountain Club Visitor Center and talked to a clerk. The clerk reported that Louise spoke with a French accent and said she had been driving all day and wanted to get in a short hike before it got dark. The clerk suggested a short trail, which was right across from the lodge they were at. It was the Lost Pond Trail on Route 16. Louise left a few minutes later in her car, and it was the last known sighting of her. She had made a reservation at the lodge at the Appalachian Mountain Club, but never returned to sign in. On November 19th, Louise failed to return home when she said she would. Her longtime partner reported her missing at once. This would spark a cross-country investigation that would leave the investigators baffled as of what had happened. The next day, November 20th, Louise's silver Ford Focus was found at the Glen Falls parking area. Then, on November 22nd, hikers would find Louise's battered and bloody body only 200 yards from the Glen Boulder Trail that Louise must have decided to hike instead of the leisurely Lost Pond Trail the clerk at the AMC had suggested. The trail was a little more of a hike than the other, and it led towards Mount Isolation. Her body was only a quarter of a mile from the lodge, indicating she had just started to hike when she was attacked on the afternoon of November 15th. An autopsy would rule her death a homicide. She had multiple stabs and clean sliced wounds on her body, but with the body not being found for a week after authorities think she died, it was hard to retrieve a lot of forensic evidence. Also, the killer or killers had a very large head start on them. As the investigation continued, they had to look at all possibilities. Did her killer follow her from Canada? This was considered a remote possibility. It was more likely she had crossed paths with someone in the States, probably at the car park or after getting on the trail. Although, since her body was found so close to the car park, it would have been a very brief encounter with whoever killed her. It looked like a random killing, and this makes it very difficult for investigators to solve. The biggest clues that the authorities hoped would help was what had been taken from the victim. The items include a dark blue Canuck sleeping bag, a blue backpack with a Canadian insignia on it, and also her car keys, which had an S pendant. It's unknown if the attackers took the items from Louise or took her car keys and then raided her car for the items after killing her. The case is still unsolved, with $75,000 reward for any information that helps solve it. If you know anything, you can contact the Cold Case Unit in New Hampshire. Okay, she goes on to the two other cases, but with Louise, there's a few curiosities here. So I don't know if a 52-year-old woman would be the prime target for most serial killers. Again, it depends on the serial killer, but usually young women are more of a target, even when the crime is not sexual in nature. That's just the way the statistics add up. There's not a whole lot of people over 50 just being randomly murdered by killers in comparison to younger people. The other curiosity, of course, is why she took the harder trail and not the recommendation that she was given, if indeed that was the case. And how many pairs of hiking boots did she have? And would she take water with her? Or when she was attacked, did her killer or killers take her water and put it back in the vehicle? just to confuse, and they were wearing gloves, so there were no prints or anything found. It's really bizarre. It's quite curious, but again, this has the outline of something that might be a random killing, and it's weird. So the frequency of the killing, if these are traveling killers, because you would think a sicko freak that needs to kill people, they have these homicidal urges. Of course, some live in a particular area and there's years and years between murders, but others travel far and wide and kill more frequently. So obviously it's unknown which was which, but I'm sure a thorough investigation should have been done with interviews of any shady individuals or people in that area. It's really tough. It's really tough. In 2019, a Canadian podcast revisited this particular case, and this was the podcast Syntheses. And Boris Prowl of this podcast traced her steps and talked to locals about the case. Dr. Marie Pinault was the best friend of Louise Chaput, which Prowl, this guy with the Syntheses podcast, they did a 5-part podcast on Valerie LeBlanc, the 2011 unsolved murder in Quebec of this 18-year-old student who was found burned and mutilated in a wooden area. The coroner on the case was Dr. Marie Pinault, who happened to be the best friend of Louise Chaput. So Chaput decided to go hiking alone on this trip after her hiking trip with friends got canceled. And of course, Chaput had hiked the White Mountains and Mount Washington specifically before as well. Prowl said the case was widely publicized in Quebec, but many strange details caught his attention. One thing was the location. Prowl said a hiking trail just a short distance from the Appalachian Mountain Club's Pinkham Notch Visitor Center seemed like an unusual place for a murder. That's a good point. If you were going to murder someone in the wilderness, would you do it really close to the visitor center? That is bizarre. In addition, Chaput's dark blue internal frame backpack with a down sleeping bag was never found. And Prowl wondered why would Chaput take her backpack and sleeping bag but leave her hiking boots in the car? And then, of course, the bottle of water and the chocolate. The keys to her silver Ford Focus station wagon were also missing, although the vehicle itself remained in the parking lot adjacent to the visitor center. So this is really close by the visitor center. Another interesting thing statistically, that the Appalachian Trail is actually really safe. Now, I believe there's been a couple of murders since this was written, but as of October 9th, 2017, so as of October 2017, more than 2,100 miles, 14 states, there's only been 11 murders since 1974. Which, again, if you consider the size of the area, there's been a couple more, I think, recently, the past couple years. But we're still talking very, very low numbers since 1974, considering the amount of land there is. And all of the 11 people here up to 2017, through the end of 2017, who were killed on the trail were killed by a stranger in terms of whose murders were solved. So some of them were not solved. In 2019, May 13th, New York Times ran an article, "Fatal Stabbing on Appalachian Trail is Uncovered Thanks to GPS and a Dog." An emergency signal was sent from a hiker's GPS device on the Appalachian Trail. The dog led them to its owner, James L. Jordan, who was standing 30 yards away. When they found the body of the missing hiker who had been stabbed to death, a companion of the hikers had also been wounded. That led authorities to charge Mr. Jordan, a 30-year-old from West Yarmouth, Massachusetts, in federal court on Monday with 1 count of murder and 1 count of assault with the intent to murder. The attack on the hiker, who has not been publicly identified, and his companion has unnerved denizens of the hiking world who meander through the wilderness of the 2,190-mile Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. Many members of this disparate, determined, and close-knit group yearn to disconnect from the world and find solitude on the trail, but they often depend on the online network of guides and social media groups to keep informed and to stay safe. The fatal stabbing was the 10th murder on the trail in 45 years of record keeping, he said. It's safer on the trail than getting to it, Mr. King said, all this with the caveat that statistics mean absolutely nothing to the families and peripheral victims. Mr. Jordan had been known to hikers and law enforcement agencies whose jurisdictions stretch along the trail since April, when he was accused of threatening people on the trail in Tennessee. He waved a knife and an axe at a shelter, and he acted disturbed and unstable. Okay, so there's varying statistics here. Okay. So yeah, would you pick a spot so close to the lodge to commit murder? Some people believe this was some kind of robbery gone wrong, some kind of situation like this. To date, the case is unsolved. Here's an article from NHPR.org investigating North Country's cold cases murdered and missing. The New Hampshire Cold Case Unit recently finished its first year. Among the 108 cases on its roster are 8 from the North Country, and investigators have found that sometimes the passage of time helps. When it comes to investigating old murder cases, including some from the North Country, the years that have gone by can be a good thing. The passage of time is both a help and a hindrance to us. That's William Delker, the Senior Assistant Attorney General who heads up the state's cold case unit, which recently ended its first full year of operation. It is a help because people often grow up and mature. Relationships change over time, and people are willing to provide information that they weren't 10, 20, or more years ago. In short, friends may no longer be friends, husband and wives may no longer be married. For whatever reason, some people are more likely to blab. But there are also some downsides. Probably the biggest difficulty in these cases is they are very, very labor-intensive and time-consuming to work on. That's also related to the passage of time. The reason they are so much more labor-intensive and time-consuming than an ordinary homicide is because people move, people's names change, and sometimes people die. It takes a lot of research to track people down. Delker says the unit currently has 125 victims of unsolved murders in 108 cases. He said the unit typically focuses on 5 or 6 cases and intensively works on 1. There are several things that attract the unit to particular cases. One is that the evidence in the case could be subjected to new forensic testing. Another is a lead that was never followed up. Or one of those relationships has changed, making it more likely someone is willing to talk. But it all takes time. From the moment you pick up a file until you are able to make an arrest, it is between 6 months and 12 months of solid work to bring a case to conclusion. Last June, an investigation resulted in the arrest of David McLeod in 4 counts of second-degree murder for starting a fire in a multifamily dwelling in Keene that killed a couple and 2 children. On its list of about 108 cases are 8 from the North Country. They include 7 homicides and the case of Maura Murray, who disappeared in 2004. Delker says the unit is currently investigating the 2005 murder of Tom Conrad, 54, who was shot to death outside his home in Pike. Delker said evidence in another case has been sent for DNA testing. And of course, we did go over Tom Conrad in the Maura Murray series before. Very, very bizarre. So here's a few other cases. Maurice Guguerre, 1991, from the town of Dummer, Dummer. May 2nd, 1991, Maurice Guguerre, age 30, was found in the Androscoggin River in Dummer, New Hampshire. He died as a result of gunshot wounds. Maurice had been born in Gorham, New Hampshire, but was living in Nashua, New Hampshire at the time of his death. Maurice was last seen leaving a party across the street from his home in Claremore Drive in Nashua on February 22nd, 1991. He was reported missing by a roommate March 3rd, 1991. Quite some time after. And this is, of course, another case of someone last seen leaving a party. Raymond Brault, 1987 from Berlin. Unsolved homicide. The body of Raymond Brault, age 17, of Jericho Road, Berlin, New Hampshire, was found at approximately 6:30 a.m. April 22nd, 1987, on a railroad bed adjacent to Jericho Road by railroad workers. The victim died as a result of a single stab wound to the heart. Louise Chaput, which we already went over. Pamela Webb, which we already went over. Sherry Roth, 1977, from Bartlett. Sherry Roth, age 22, left her home alone on Sunday, August 21st, 1977, in North Conway, New Hampshire, to go hiking on Sawyer Brook Trail in Livermore, New Hampshire, between Bartlett and Lincoln. She did not return home and was reported missing that evening by friends. Her body was discovered August 24th, 1977. An autopsy indicated she had been strangled to death. And her website, a website in her honor, is still up, sherryroth.com, $25,000 reward. And the information here from the website. August 21st, 1977, Sherry Lynn Roth, at 22, was found murdered near Sawyer Pond off Route 302 in Bartlett State Park, New Hampshire, located in the White Mountain National Park region. To the present date, her murder is still unsolved and is considered an open case by New Hampshire State Police. Sherry moved to North Conway, New Hampshire after graduated from Syracuse University. Prior to graduating, she attended the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She became very active in working with the elderly community, battered women, and troubled teens. New Hampshire had named a cross-country ski trail after her located in Jackson. So not a ton of information. And there's really not many news articles past 1977, 1978. And most of these articles just talk about her and her life, not really the details. 2 weeks from the day she was killed, she was to leave for Wisconsin and a camping trip with a friend. She had just become a full-time director at the Women's Health Services Clinic only 2 weeks before her death. It is interesting, though. That's a curious detail, because if there was someone, if a battered woman or someone confided in her, is it possible this was not a stranger killing her and someone who had kept tabs on her? On the other hand, this is also the late 70s, so if someone's not physically following someone, it would be difficult to know exactly where they are going. Paul Olson, 1973, Madison. On June 24th, 1973, Paul Olson, age 20, was found wrapped in blankets laying in a stream near Route 113 in Madison, New Hampshire. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was due to asphyxia from obstruction of the mouth and nose. And he was 20 years old. It was a stream near Route 113 in Madison, New Hampshire. Yeah, this is rough. There's no shortage of murder and missing persons in this area of the country. Now, Christopher King is a journalist who actually covered the Lyco Kenny murder and Bruce McKay situation. And he also had this article on his blog, christopher-king.blogspot.com, August 29th, 2008. Kingcast presents Jan and Stephen Dow, likely murdered by a foul New Hampshire law enforcement Richard Dow, who got away clean in 24 hours like Gregory W. Floyd. And he's been gone over, of course. The same sort of government malfeasance and cover-up is raging 25 years later today in New Hampshire in the Franconia shooting tragedy and the Michael Addison, Michael Briggs shooting potential murder and anything else that crosses New Hampshire Attorney General Kelly Ayotte's palm. Okay, so the Dow, he has a link here to the Dow Murders website, dowmurders.com, which is no longer up. But you can go on Wayback Machine and find it. So this is the breakdown here. Discovery, December 10th, 1982, in the town of Thornton, New Hampshire, the cover-up of 2 murders began. A mother and son had been coldly murdered in their home, and a fearing motor vehicle accident had been staged. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Staging accidents? Responding officials use the staged accident as the underpinning for their official report. So again, I'm not saying this is an MO of corrupt law enforcement or state officials. However, if you look at the Stephen Avery case, check out the MINDSHOCK podcast on that, particularly Coincidence County, where there seems to be a history of frame-ups and planting of evidence. It's completely mind-boggling. It's completely mind-boggling. So I'm not saying that occurred here, but let's see what information is brought forth. Responding 1982 officials deliberately and willfully mishandled this investigation. A murderer was left unchallenged and allowed to continue walking the streets of our society. This murderer believed that by virtue of his law enforcement background that he was in a protected class. He believed that he could get away with this murder. After the 1982 state police investigation concluded, he knew his belief was in fact reality. He was allowed to get away with murder, and he continued on further endangering other lives. This cover-up began to unfold before dawn, 15 days before Christmas 1982. Following is a chronicled account of how this incident began to unfold. In the early morning hours of December 10th, 1982, an explosion was heard. Moments later, a former firefighter, John Sperling, left his home heading for work. Turning right at the end of his driveway, he entered onto Route 175 in Thornton, New Hampshire. Glancing into his rearview mirror, he noticed a bright orange glow piercing the darkness. Thinking fire, he stopped, popped his vehicle into reverse, and quickly backed up the road. Approximately 500 feet back, on his left, he discovered the source of an orange glow. A vehicle, burning furiously, was off the roadway. At discovery, only the interior of the vehicle was burning furiously. The vehicle, off-road, came to a gentle and non-violent stop when it reached the bottom of a short embankment, almost like it had been deliberately placed right there. There was no impact, as the vehicle had not collided with anything. There was no one about. There were no signs of life, no screams for help. Sperling exited his vehicle, mindful that the burning vehicle might explode, cautiously but hurriedly approached the driver's side. Through the furious flames, he could barely discern a body slumped up against the steering wheel. The body was already acutely charred, the person clearly dead. The inferno was so intense that Sperling could not tell if anyone else was injured or dead inside. Conducting a quick survey of the scene, he noted that there were no other vehicles involved and no persons had been ejected or walked away from the vehicle. Desperate for help, Sperling looked up the road and through the leafless trees. He noticed lights on in a residence approximately 500 feet north of this horrible scene. A New Hampshire law enforcement officer, Richard Dow, lived in the residence. In a high state of frustration, Sperling wondered why Officer Dow was not responding to the scene. Sperling thought Dow must have heard the explosion. He must be aware of the fire. Why wasn't Dow responding to the scene? Jumping into his vehicle, Sperling raced to his own home, just yards away, to notify authorities. Authorities arrive at the scene. In total, the fire burned approximately 25 minutes before it was extinguished. Firefighters quickly arrived. One of the firefighters was Alfred Burbank. Burbank was also a captain for Waterville Police Department. Thornton's police chief, Walter Joyce, arrived. New Hampshire State Police were notified. The fire was quickly extinguished. Looking into the rubble, a firefighter discovered a second victim. The second victim's legs were bent behind the body and lying prone, appearing like a person in a sleep position. Both bodies were so severely and acutely burned that the New Hampshire State Police identified the remains as being indistinguishable and unidentifiable. The second victim was lying prone across where the rear seat would have been. The victim had at least one broken leg, the bone visible to the eye. The back of this person's head was bashed in. What caused the broken leg? How did the victim's head get bashed in? What was the make and year of the vehicle? Whose vehicle was it? The vehicle was Jan's brand new 1982 four-door hatchback front-wheel drive Saab with an automatic transmission and very low mileage. Jan was a rural route postal carrier for the town of Thornton. She used the car to deliver mail. Was the rear passenger seat area modified in any way to accommodate Jan in her job as a rural route carrier? The vehicle was manufactured with many features, one of those being safeguards to prevent the gas tank from exploding in an accident and fire. That sounds useful. Another feature was heated seats. This is 1982. That's pretty cool. The accident was suspicious in nature. Following are some of the red flags present. 1, the hour was very early before dawn. 2, there were no skid marks on or off the road. 3, the driver had not implemented any evasive action. 4, the tires never lost contact with the ground. 5, it was a non-violent accident, yet fire was involved. 6, there was minimal damage to the vehicle. 7, there was no impact. The vehicle came to a gentle stop on its own. 8, it was clear that speed was not a factor. 9, there was no fire trail on the ground. 10, upon discovery, only the interior of the vehicle was on fire. 11, brakes had never been applied on or off the road. 12, because it was such a non-violent accident, neither victim should have been seriously injured, never mind dead, and so on. Why would one of these adults be lying prone in a sleep-like position in the rear seat of the vehicle? Both victims were obviously adults, yet the front passenger seat was empty. Remember, the second victim was found lying prone across the rear passenger seat's area. Remember, there's a question as to whether the rear passenger seat compartment had been modified for Jan's job. What caused the fire? The fire originated in the interior of the vehicle. The accident was nonviolent in nature, essentially traveling at 0 miles per hour when it left the roadway. A vehicle simply just does not burst into flames. It's like spontaneous vehicle combustion. Why hadn't either opened a door and exited the vehicle? There was no speed involved. The doors were not jammed or locked. Who were the victims? Both victims were acutely charred, unrecognizable, and indistinguishable. Why hadn't the driver applied the brakes or implemented evasive action while the vehicle was moving on or off the roadway? Why hadn't they exited the vehicle? The vehicle's tracks, visible in a light dusting of snow or frost, demonstrated the vehicle had traveled in a straight line to the point of exit. Slowly it had rolled down the embankment, stopping on its own when it reached the bottom, to what appears to be the lowest gravitational point. There was no impact, no crash. It was clear that the brakes had never been applied and the driver had not implemented evasive action either on or off the roadway. The doors of the vehicle were not jammed, the accident nonviolent. Neither victim was trapped inside the vehicle and, if alive and conscious, could have easily exited the vehicle. How fast was the vehicle traveling when it exited the roadway? When the vehicle reached the bottom of the embankment, which was just about the length of the vehicle itself, it came to a gentle stop on its own. At the bottom of the embankment, there was a stream. The vehicle did not have enough momentum to travel through the stream. Across the stream, the terrain sloped sharply upwards. The vehicle did not have enough momentum to even reach the opposite slope. The New Hampshire State Police Troop F was summoned to the scene. Troop F, they just keep coming up. A New Hampshire medical referee examiner was summoned. The call to the medical examiner was placed before any state troopers arrived on the scene. Trooper Brian Van Dines was the first New Hampshire state trooper to arrive. He immediately recognized the vehicle as belonging to the Dows. How did Van Dines recognize Jan's vehicle? Cement blocks were scattered throughout the vehicle. One of the cement blocks in the back had split apart. None of the cement blocks were outside the vehicle. A number of cement blocks were around the head and chest area of the victim in the back seat. A couple of those blocks were on the floor of the front passenger seat. None had exited the vehicle. The vehicle was a front-wheel drive vehicle and did not need cement blocks in the front or rear of the vehicle for added traction. What were the cement blocks doing in the vehicle? Why hadn't any landed outside the vehicle? Why was one of the cement blocks split? What caused the split? According to the state police report, the bodies were so badly burned that they were unrecognizable and indistinguishable from each other. The body in the driver's seat was faced forward, slumped up against the steering wheel. The driver, if conscious and alive, should have known that the car was beginning to leave the roadway and there should have been some evasive action taken and/or brakes applied. Both arms of the victims were hanging straight down. The hands were not clutching the steering wheel, nor in the vicinity of the head, nor on the dashboard. When removed from the vehicle, the body began to break apart. It was obvious the victim had made no attempt to exit the vehicle. The body was completely blackened and unrecognizable. The bastion head of the victim in the rear seat did not appear to have the three-cornered characteristics as should happen if struck by a corner of a cement block, nor did it have the flattened characteristics if it had been struck with the flat part of the cement block. This victim was lying prone, almost in a fetal position, across where the passenger seat would have been. The legs of the victim were bent. The body was too long to lie straight down across. A broken bone was protruding out from the upper leg. The body was also acutely charred and unrecognizable. All the glass windows in the vehicle was gone. No glass was found on the ground outside the vehicle. Sperling, the former firefighter who had discovered the vehicle, heard through the crowd of officials present that glass had been found on the roadway just north of the scene. There was no fire trail on the ground demonstrating the gas tank had not ruptured, spilling gasoline, and exploded. Despite the fact that when discovered, only the interior of the vehicle was engulfed in flames, the fiberglass gas tank had completely melted. The gas tank was located above and protected by the muffler. No collision was involved, headlights still intact. What was the temperature and weather that morning? By all accounts, the temperature was bitterly cold that December morning. At the time of the accident, there was no precipitation. The vehicle was discovered before dawn, approximately 6 a.m. Route 175 was and is a rural, quiet country road meandering through forest, mountains, and country towns. It was and is primarily residential. Authorities were looking at an accident scene that made no sense. A vehicle simply does not burst into flames from just rolling off the road, down a short embankment, and without colliding with anything. Investigating officials recognized from the characteristics of the scene that the driver was either unconscious or dead before the vehicle even stopped. Additionally, authorities recognized that the accident was so minor, at least one should have survived. Instead, both were dead. Investigative conclusions were to be based on facts, not fabricated facts or innuendo. Policy and procedures were in place, which officials were obligated to follow. One of those procedures was to contact the fire marshal whenever there was a fire involved in a fatality. Other procedures include 1. Investigate the accident scene. 2. Document the facts and details at the scene. 3. Substantiating and supporting conclusions based on info gathered from standard operating procedures. 4. Conducting acceptable forensic and medical analysis. 5. Conducting a 24-hour background check for each of the victims. 6. Interviewing all witnesses, and so on. Investigating authorities, New Hampshire State Police, Thornton Fire Department, and a New Hampshire medical examiner knowingly and willfully discarded required procedures. Crucial and basic fatal accident investigative procedures were knowingly violated. Crucial facts were omitted, substituted with manufactured facts and/or innuendo. Officials approached the Dow residence. After the fire was put out, the first New Hampshire State Trooper had arrived, and a preliminary examination of the scene had taken place. And the Dow's residence was approached. Foul play was in the minds of the 1982 officials. At approximately 7 a.m. on the morning of December 10, 1982, New Hampshire State Police Trooper Brian Van Dynes and Captain Butch Burbank of Waterville Police Department approached the Dow residence, and it was impossible to visually identify the victims, and because they knew the vehicle belonged to the Dows, they surmised that the vehicles were two of the Dows. Neither had any idea who would answer the door, if anyone at all. Richard Dow answered their knock. Captain Burbank noticed what appeared to be blood on the jeans of Dow. Upon notification that it was believed that his wife and adopted son were dead, Dow's reaction was off. Dow was asked who was in the car with Janet. He told them it was Stephen. Dow was informed that both his wife and son were dead. He made no attempt to go to the accident scene where his wife and adopted son lay dead. He did not ask crucial questions. Instead, he had demonstrated that he already had an understanding of what had happened. He began to offer explanations as to why he hadn't responded to the scene of the fire. He offered that explanation as to what caused the accident, fire, and deaths, and as to what occurred, and as to what caused the accident, fire, and death. Now, was he asked to offer that, or did he just randomly start offering that? The 1982 investigation. When authorities went to the Dow residence, Richard Dow answered the door. When Dow was notified that the two individuals thought to be his wife and adopted son were dead, Dow's reaction to the news was off. He didn't ask questions. He made no attempt to go to his family, to go to the scene right outside his doorway. Instead, Richard began to explain why his wife and son were dead and why he had not responded to the scene. Procedurally, it was required in any fatal incident that a commanding officer be summoned to the scene to oversee and to ensure the investigation was thorough, complete, and competent. Ranking New Hampshire State Police officers began arriving. Motor vehicle fatalities were extremely serious in nature and were to be responded to in a serious manner. Lieutenant Richard Tuck, commander of Troop F, Sergeant Thomas Kennedy, second in command of Troop F, Sergeant Frank Donahue, and Corporal Roger Hartwell arrived. Lieutenant Tuck and Sergeant Frank Donahue went to the residence. Sergeant Kennedy and Corporal Hartwell headed to the accident scene. Trooper Van Dyntz left the residence after his commander's arrival. Captain Butch Burbank stayed in the residence. Lieutenant Tuck was the officer in charge of the investigation. State police and fire procedures required that the fire marshal's office was to be called to the scene of any fire involving a fatality. The fire marshal's office was not contacted. A number of other veteran New Hampshire state troopers arrived. All had received training in basic accident investigation, had utilized that training, knew how to gather evidence and produce reports. This was all the background needed to investigate this incident in a professional and competent manner, although most, if not all, had received advanced accident investigation. Commander Tuck and Richard Dow knew each other very well. As a state trooper, Dow had worked under Lieutenant Tuck's command from approximately 1978 to 1982. Both knew a great deal about each other's activities, both professionally and personally. Richard Dow was very familiar with Lieutenant Tuck's conduct as commander of Troop F. Lieutenant Tuck, Dow's former commander, and Sergeant Donahue sat with Dow at his dining room table. Lieutenant Tuck and Dow spoke for some time. Instead of asking what happened and demanding an investigation, Dow and Lieutenant Tuck agreed on the story that the state police would publicly record. In any investigation, it is the who, what, where, when, why, and how questions that need to be answered. A procedural requirement was to investigate the actual scene, gather and scrutinize all physical evidence, to substantiate and analyze any conclusions, and to let those conclusions lead one to the truth of the matter. Commander Lieutenant Tuck, having been highly trained and in command of a troop division, knew this. Yet Lieutenant Tuck chose to disregard his legal and professional obligation to follow procedure and properly investigate this incident. At some point during Dow's discussion in the residence, Dow stated to Burbank that he was aware of the fire and thought that his neighbor was having a chimney fire. When asked why he had not responded, Dow answered because it was too cold out. That's an interesting response from a police officer. Investigative answers were developed while Dow was sitting with Lieutenant Tuck at the dining room table. These conclusions were extremely detailed, details that no one could have possibly known except the victims, along with the conclusions that were impossible to arrive at without gathering and analyzing evidence present at the scene. What caused the accident, fire, and deaths? Who were the victims? Who was in the driver's seat? What were they doing up so early? Where were they going? Why was the front passenger seat empty? How did Stephen end up in the rear passenger seat of the vehicle? Why was Stephen in Jan's car? Why wasn't he driving his own vehicle? Where was Stephen's vehicle? What types of accelerant were present in the vehicle? How fast was the vehicle traveling when it left the roadway? Why weren't there any skid marks in the road? Why hadn't brakes been applied? Why wasn't there any evasive action taken? And so on. At the conclusion of Commander Tuck and Dow's meeting, the 1982 investigation was over. Commander Tuck assured Dow that he needn't worry about a thing and that he would make sure that the autopsies would not be conducted. Commander Tuck left the residence and began shutting down the investigation. He initiated action to draw the focus of the state police and medical examiner and the fire chief away from investigating, examining, gathering, analyzing, and documenting crucial evidence from the actual scene. State troopers were told that autopsies were not needed, nor was any further investigation of the scene necessary. The medical examiner was told that no autopsies were needed and that the identity of the victims was known. The fire chief was told that he did not need to call in the fire marshal's office. The state police would take care of this matter. Under the direction of Lieutenant Tuck, the New Hampshire State Police investigation into this matter was over, and preparations to wrap it up began. Trooper Van Dyntz was directed to go to the Dow residence and base the New Hampshire State Police motor vehicle accident report on information Dow would provide. In the end, the New Hampshire State Police investigative conclusion was that there was a motor vehicle accident resulting in a fire that tragically killed the wife and son of a law enforcement officer. All officials involved followed Lieutenant Tuck's lead and turned their eyes away from the red flags that were present and recognized. Discussion about conducting autopsies ceased. Discussion about red flags present ceased. Clearly, Lieutenant Tuck did not want this incident investigated nor supported with actual facts gathered from the scene. Lieutenant Tuck was directing that this incident be professionally mishandled. It is believed that not one official present objected. All officials involved ended up complying with Commander Tuck's apparent desire to disregard all the red flags, to wrap it up, and to turn it into an incomplete and or fabricated reports. Lieutenant Tuck left the residence and utilized his rank, authority, and position as officer in charge to ensure that the New Hampshire State Police fatal accident investigative conclusions matched the conclusions generated by Richard Dow. Corporal Hartwell, the troop's accident specialist and photographer, took photographs that would, at a cursory glance, support the desired conclusions. Other crucial photographs that would have contradicted the desired conclusions were not taken. Sergeant Kennedy, second in command of Troop F, was the superior officer responsible for reviewing and accepting the accident report as having fulfilled state police fatal accident investigative procedures. Sergeant Kennedy willingly and knowingly put his acceptance signature on the state police accident report. Sergeant Kennedy's signature signified that 1, he had scrutinized the report, 2, all the conclusions generated had been arrived at through the utilization of acceptable and required fatal accident investigative procedures, tools, and techniques. 3, the state police investigation was complete, thorough, competent, and accurately reflected the actual scene and facts regarding this incident. 4, that the report was competently put together and all conclusions soundly substantiated. Even an untrained eye can discern the New Hampshire State Police report was filled with manufactured facts, innuendo, and just about all conclusions that were unsound and left unsubstantiated. It is apparent that this investigation was willingly and knowingly mishandled under the direction and lead of the highest-ranking trooper from Troop F. What did Richard Dow know about Lieutenant Tuck? What other improper activities had gone on out of Troop F under the direction of its commander, Richard Tuck? The New Hampshire State Police released their planned investigative findings to the general public. In summary, the New Hampshire State Police report states the following. Stephen was working on his vehicle out in the yard late the night before because he was having trouble with his carburetor. It's always the carburetor. He removed the carburetor and placed it in an open container of gasoline. He had been working on his car so late that Janet had woken up well after 11 p.m. to call him into the house. Then Jan and Stephen both woke up very early and both got up to let the dogs out. Then Jan and Stephen were both in Jan's car because she was giving him a ride to the garage so that he can continue working on his carburetor. Stephen had placed the carburetor in the open container of gasoline into the rear of Janet's brand new Saab. As they were leaving the driveway, Richard Dow could tell that Jan was upset because he heard her accelerate. Then the gasoline in the open container began to spill over. Then Stephen climbed over the front seat into the back seat to steady the open container of gasoline that was spilling in the vehicle. Then Jan was so emotionally distracted that she stopped paying attention to the road. The car left the roadway. Then, as the car was leaving the roadway, the cement blocks which Stephen had placed in the rear of the vehicle to help with traction came flying through the air. Cement blocks struck Stephen in the back of his head, pushing him into the back of Janet's seat, which propelled her forward. Both Stephen and Janet were either unconscious or dead prior to the impact. That the fire could have started from a vehicle malfunction, or maybe the gas tank had been ruptured by a nearby rock, or because of gasoline spraying inside the vehicle that could have ignited them could have ignited from any short. The New Hampshire State Police concluded that the cause of the accident was due to the driver being emotionally distracted. How does that cover the all the windows in the car magically disappearing on the roadway? The New Hampshire State Police concluded that the origin and cause of the fire was due to the fact that there was an open container of gasoline present in the vehicle which ignited from any short. And then magically the cinder blocks killed everybody, and then they all went, the vehicle all moving slowly just went off the road. And it's, I mean, I don't know. The public was told that a thorough investigation had taken place and that Jan and Stephen Dow had died in a tragic Fury motor vehicle accident. Dow provided the investigative conclusions of the New Hampshire State Police. The New Hampshire State Police, under their commander's direction, let Dow be the investigator, forensic specialist, medical pathologist, and fire investigator. The 5 primary New Hampshire State Police officials involved in the 1982 investigation were 1. Lieutenant Richard Tuck, commander of Troop F, 2. Sergeant Thomas Kennedy, second in command of Troop F, 3. Sergeant Francis Donahue, commander of the Hazardous Waste Unit, 4. Corporal Roger Hartwell, patrol supervisor, troop photographer, and troop accident specialist, 5. Trooper Brian Van Dynes. Other officials directly involved in the 82 investigation: 1. Dr. John Bentwood, New Hampshire State Medical Examiner. 2. Mr. Martin, Chief of the Campton Thornton Fire Department. The LaFontaine Funeral Home arrived, removed the bodies, and was released to transport the bodies to Concord for cremation. Man, this is shady. The vehicle was towed from the scene. Shortly afterwards, it was sent off to be scrapped. After the scene was cleared, Dow had the towing company tow away Stephen's car. Dow sold the car. Dow made contact with one of Stephen's good friends, Brad Benton, and offered Brad Stephen's clothes. Dow had a friends and family gathering at the house. Stephen's girlfriend went to this gathering. She asked Dow if she could retrieve letters she had written to Stephen. Dow brought her into her room. She could not find the letters. The next day, she went to Stephen's vehicle to see if the letters were in his car. They were not. Missing from Stephen's vehicle were his stereo system and fog lights. Dow gave away most of the photos of Jan and Stephen. The photos he kept were primarily of the dogs and pictures of himself in uniform. What does that tell us? 1982 medical examiner's response. New Hampshire medical examiners went only to the scenes of suspicious deaths. Suspicious characteristics present at this scene: 1. Apparent absence of speed. 2. Apparent lack of awareness of the driver. 3. Nonviolent accident that involved fire. 4. Absence of skid marks, evasive action in braking. 5. Placement of the bodies, and so on. 1982 responding police and fire officials clearly recognized the red flags as evidenced by their call summoning a New Hampshire medical examiner, Dr. John Bentwood, to the scene. Further evidence that the 1982 responding police and fire officials had recognized red flags that clearly raised strong suspicions that this accident was no accident can be demonstrated by observations made and questions presented by Captain Butch Burbank to Dow. The burning vehicle had been discovered around 6 a.m. A call made to Dr. Bentwood around 6:30 a.m. Dr. Bentwood arrived at the scene approximately an hour and a quarter later, around 7:45 a.m. Dr. Bentwood was more than qualified to be a medical examiner in the state of New Hampshire. He was and is a medical doctor, a surgeon. Comments and questions made by Dr. Bentwood at the scene demonstrate that he also picked up on the suspicious nature of this accident. Dr. Bentwood made comments such as the accident appeared so minor in nature that no one should have ended up dead or even seriously injured. He also questioned why neither victim had not just simply opened up a door and exited the vehicle. He wondered if the doors were jammed. The doors were not jammed. Dr. Bentwood was also quoted making another interesting comment. If it weren't for the fire, both would have survived. This is particularly interesting because the back of Stephen's head was bashed in, and he had at least one broken bone in his leg that was visible to the naked eye. Dr. Bentwood, by law, direct or implied, was obligated to 1. To conduct a detailed examination of the scene and bodies. 2. To faithfully record those details. 3. To determine the cause of death and identities of each victim through implementing acceptable medical procedures. Dr. Bentwood's detailed examination of the scene and bodies ended up being a mockery. It consisted of walking down the embankment, peering through a window, and conferring with ranking state police troopers. Dr. Bentwood was not some backwoods country boy who didn't know any better. He was a highly educated medical doctor who was a surgeon. 1. Dr. Bentwood could see that both victims were unrecognizable, indistinguishable, and unidentifiable through visual means. Both bodies were completely scorched and blackened. It was impossible to identify either victim through visual means. Yet in his report, Dr. Bentwood disregards these facts. Instead, he records the victims were burnt to an almost unidentifiable degree and were reportedly that of Janet and Stephen Dow. So they were unidentified, but they were these people. This means that Dr. Bentwood knowingly recorded an untruth. By publicly recording that both victims were burned to an almost unidentifiable degree and were reportedly that of Janet and Stephen Dow, Dr. Brentwood is stating that both victims could be positively identified and were positively identified. But how can one visually identify two acutely burned bodies? Not to mention, no autopsy, no confirmation of anything. Weird. Dr. Benton does not record how these two victims were identified, nor does he record who identified them. Dr. Bentwood does not substantiate his conclusion that the victims were that of Janet and Stephen Dow. For all anyone knew, this was a sophisticated insurance scam, with two people other than Jan and Stephen Dow being the victims. Perhaps Jan and Stephen were waiting at some other location for Richard Dow, who would join them after collecting all insurance monies. 2. The back of the head of the victim in the rear seat area of the vehicle was bashed in. A broken leg was visible to the eye. The body was lying prone across the rear seat with legs bent as if in a sleep position. These details are not recorded in Dr. Bentwood's report. Dr. Bentwood records that the body in the driver's seat was pushed up against the steering wheel and that the front seat was pushed forward. That was the third point. Dr. Bentwood does not record whether the body of the victim was facing forward or whether the victim was partially ejected through the windshield. The body shows no visible fractures or skeletal damage. Dr. Benton does not record this in his report. 4. Recognizing the accident was nonviolent in nature and that nothing added up, questions regarding what caused the deaths of these two people came up. Conducting autopsy was an issue that was discussed at the scene. After conferring with ranking New Hampshire State Police officers, Dr. Bentwood decided to disregard the red flags. He recorded autopsies were not necessary to establish the actual cause of the deaths. Dr. Bentwood then invented the cause of the deaths. He invented the same cause of the deaths for both victims, recording that both victims had died by burning to death. When questioned years later as to the basis for his medical conclusion that both had burned to death, Dr. Bentwood stated that, quote, "It was obvious. Both bodies were severely burned." When it was pointed out to Dr. Bentwood that, yes, bodies do burn in a fire, and then re-asked how he had arrived at his conclusion that both victims had burned to death, Dr. Bentwood was silent. It was an absolute necessity to obtain the cooperation of the medical examiner and the fire chief in order to be able to record and publicly present the prearranged scenario that Jan and Stephen had died in a fiery car accident as agreed to by the New Hampshire State Police and Richard Dow. In 1982, Dr. Brentwood clearly made a decision to cooperate with the New Hampshire State Police. He wrote up a manufactured report so it could be portrayed that these two had undoubtedly died as a result of a violent motor vehicle accident. Dr. Bentwood decided to disregard his legal, moral, and ethical obligation to ensure that positive identification had taken place through acceptable methods. He disregarded his obligation to establish the cause of death for each victim independently and through a detailed examination utilizing acceptable medical procedures. He did not record the actual condition of the bodies. He recorded untruths. It is clear that Dr. Bentwood chose to ignore his obligation as a New Hampshire medical examiner. It is clear that Dr. Bentwood's overriding concern was not what caused these two inexplicable and therefore suspicious deaths, but rather was more interested in pleasing the New Hampshire State Police. In order for the New Hampshire State Police to assume complete control over all aspects of this investigation, fire, medical, and enforcement, it was absolutely necessary to elicit and gain the cooperation of the medical examiner, Dr. Bentwood, and Fire Chief Martin. Both of these supported independent entities, independent in quotes, needed to shrug off their own obligations to the residents of the state. Both compliantly did just that. And that's another interesting point there, because the coroner wasn't even allowed on the scene in the Stephen Avery case to examine the burn pit where there's an alleged murder victim. Because is it possible that all the corrupt framers didn't think they could get her to go along? Because she was the only one without an obvious conflict of interest. Okay, let's move on here to Dow's alleged admissions. In the fall of 1989, Richard Dow and Karen Safian, although separated, still maintained a relationship. It was during this time frame that Dow revealed to Karen that Jan and Stephen had not died in a car accident as publicly reported. The following was reported to the New Hampshire State Police by Karen Safian. It was late at night. We were both sitting in the living room on opposite sides of the room. My son was sleeping at my parents' house. We were not arguing, nor were we speaking about Jan and Stephen. Neither of us had been drinking. Out of the blue, Dow suddenly began asking me questions. He began by asking, "How did Jan and Stephen really die? How do you think they really died, Karen?" She responds, "They died in a car accident." Dow says, "Why did the accident happen so close to the house?" "Think, Karen, why do you think the accident happened so close to the house?" Karen says, "I don't know why it happened so close to the house." Dow says, "Why weren't there any skid marks in the road?" Karen says, "I don't know why there weren't any skid marks in the road." "Think, Karen, why weren't there any skid marks on the road?" "I don't know why." "You're not thinking, Karen. Think. Why weren't there any skid marks in the road?" This is playing out. If this is accurate, as Karen is alleging, this is playing out like some kind of scene from a horror movie with a psycho serial killer ranting. I mean, it's really bizarre. Karen says, "I don't know why. Do you know why?" He says, "Yes, I know why." So Karen says, "Why weren't there any skid marks in the road?" Dow got up and began to move. I stood up. He went over to a shelf where we had pictures of Stephen. Dow picked up the picture, held it up in my view, my direction, looked at me and shouted, quote, "Because this expletive shot his mother. That's why," end quote. Dow threw the picture in my direction. It flew past me and crashed into the kitchen cupboards, fell on the floor, and I heard the glass break. I stood still, so still, just looking at him. I remember feeling horrified, so horrified that time seemed to stand still. I felt like I had just entered into a surreal world. Karen asked, "Stephen shot his mother when? While she was driving the car?" "No, that doesn't make any sense. While she was driving the car? Why would he shoot her while she was driving? What do you mean? How do you know this? He shot her while she was driving?" Dow stated, "No, not while she was driving the car." Dow sat back down on the couch, arms resting on his legs, hands clasped together. I sat back down, trying to absorb what he had just said, trying to make sense of it. He was silent. I broke the silence. "Then what? When did Stephen shoot her? Before? No? When did he shoot her? How do you know he shot her?" Dow says, "Well, you see, it was late at night. I had just finished working. I worked part-time for 2 different departments back then. I was sitting in the living room relaxing before bed. Everything was quiet. I decided that it was time to go to bed. I got up and went down into the cellar. You see, we had a coal stove, and I went down to put coal in the stove for the night. While I was down there, I heard a gunshot." Karen, "Gunshots are loud. You think they are, like they are on TV, but they're not. I heard a pop sound. That's all, just a pop. I knew it was a gunshot. I stopped and listened. I heard another pop. I grabbed the axe. It was sitting there by the stairs. I walked up the stairs, went around the corner into the bedroom. I saw a figure standing over Jan. I attacked the figure with the axe. It was Stephen. I took them. I put them in the car. There were cement blocks in the car. I told Stephen not to put those in the car, but he didn't listen to me. There was a bucket of gasoline in the car with a piece of an engine part soaking in it. I told Stephen not to put that in the car too, but again, he didn't listen to me. He never listened to me. I rolled the car down the road. I went back to the house, waited for the police to come. They came to the door. I answered the door in my skivvies, and Chuckle said something like, "Hey, aren't you guys here a little early?" It was around 7 a.m. They asked who was in the car with Janet. I asked them why. They asked me again who was in the car with Janet. I told them Stephen and asked why, what happened. They told me that there had been an accident and that both were dead. I told them that Janet and Stephen had been arguing that morning. I was still in bed. I vaguely heard them something about Stephen not wanting to take the bus to school. I think he wanted Jan to drive him to school. She didn't want to, but I guess she gave in and decided to drive him. Dow was staring intently ahead. He stopped speaking. He did not look at me while he was saying this. He did not look at me after he finished. The highlighted part in italics, Dow said differently and more intensely. When he was speaking, the thought came to me that he had said this before. And this is referencing the cement blocks and Stephen not listening to him, never listening to him. We were both silent. Finally, I broke the silence. Did you know it was Stephen when you attacked him? Dow says no. Karen asks again, you didn't know it was Stephen. I couldn't tell who it was because the room was dark. Why didn't you call an ambulance? Why didn't you call for help? Dow says, I knew that they were both dead. Karen asks, did you try to resuscitate them? Dow says, I had seen many dead people before. I know when a person is dead. Karen says, why didn't you call the police? Dow says, I didn't want Jan to feel embarrassed by having everyone know that her own son had killed her. And he said this part, her own son had killed her, with focus directly on her, and very loudly. Now, okay, if this is all true, this is really bizarre. And I wonder how many people stage certain scenes to avoid embarrassment. Again, I'm not saying that's what happened here, but in other cases, what are the common variables when that occurs? So continuing on here, I sat still, returning his stare but becoming quiet. An eerie feeling came over me, and the thought immediately occurred to me that he was telling me what was going to happen to me and my son. I pushed the thought aside. And that's pretty scary if you put yourself in her shoes. Again, assuming all of this is accurate and this was actually what was reported. Again, this website is no longer up. We were both silent again for a few moments. I broke the silence again. What gun did Stephen use? Dow said he used one of my police guns. Dow turned his stare away from me, returning to staring intently straight in front of him. Karen asked, he used one of your police guns? How did he get a hold of one of your police guns? I kept the guns in the bedroom closet on a shelf. Stephen must have gone into the closet and gotten the gun. The gun was on the table outside of the bedroom. There was a pile of wads next to the gun. Stephen must have kept them there. Wads? What are wads? Dow stated. They're ammunition that police used for practice instead of real bullets. Karen asked, Stephen didn't shoot Jan with real bullets? Dow says no. He shot her with practice ammunition? Yes. But wouldn't Jan have heard Stephen walking in the room? He would have had to go to the closet, get the gun and the practice ammunition, and then left the room to load the gun, then gone back into the room. Wouldn't she have heard him? Wouldn't she have woken up? Dow only shrugged. When you were downstairs, did you hear him walking? No. When you went into the room, did Stephen turn towards you? No. So he didn't shoot at you? No. Did he turn towards you? Did he look like he was going to shoot at you? No. Did Stephen know you were coming up behind him? No. Stephen didn't hear you approaching? He had no idea that you were coming up behind him? No. You put both of them in the car. You just rolled the car down the road? Yes. How did the fire start? Dow shrugged. Karen asked, did you start the fire? Dow was silent. Did you start the car on fire? No. If you didn't start the car on fire, then how would it have caught on fire? Dow shrugged and then responded, just lucky, I guess. If you didn't start the fire, then I guess you were lucky. Maybe God started the fire for you. Dow looked at me sharply, intently. Why would it be lucky, though? Like you would phrase it like, let's say if you were completely innocent of all. I mean, I don't know what innocent means in this context. You're obviously guilty of staging, but at minimum and possible murder, depending on how the situation. If he saw someone shoot his spouse and he had an axe in his hand and he's just reacting, but he hacked the person from behind. I mean, I don't know. What is that classified as? That's not specifically self-defense because he's stating that this figure did not turn around and attempt to shoot him. He's witnessing this figure shoot someone else with practice ammunition, and he's hacking them. He might have not known it was practice ammunition at the time, whatever. But he just hacked them in the spine and killed them as he's seeing them shoot somebody else. I don't know. That's a tricky situation if that's what happened. Like legally, what does all that entail? Well, God must have started the fire for you, huh? If you didn't start it, then God must have looked down and said, I don't want Dow to get caught. Of course, he would know what happened, and so he started the fire because he was protecting you, because he knew that if there wasn't a fire, when the police came, they would see the blood and stuff, and you know that would have been visible, very visible. And so if it wasn't your fault, then God must have started the fire to protect you. What do you think? Dow didn't say anything. He was staring at me intently. I began to feel extremely nervous, edgy. I looked away and dropped it. I then came back with another question. But the bullet holes, why didn't they discover the bullet holes in Jan? Dow shrugged. Wouldn't the gunshot wounds have shown up in the autopsy? Dow shrugged and then responded, I don't know. We were both quiet. I was lost in thought. I remembered wondering if this was what the root of his rages and what appeared to be intense self-hatred. This time, Dow broke the silence. When the state police came to the house, they brought Butch Burbank with them. I don't know why they brought Butch with them. Maybe they thought Butch was a close friend of mine or something. I couldn't figure out why they brought Butch with them. Was Butch a good friend? No, not really. I really didn't know Butch that well. Again, we were both silent. I broke the silence. Do you remember the night you were riding around with Richard Hansen? It was right after Jan and Steven's death. Do you remember? Yes. You said to him, I can't keep this to myself anymore. I have to tell someone this. And then you guys met up with some other state troopers or something and you were interrupted. Dow was looking intently at me. He began to slowly nod in the affirmative. Was this what you were going to tell him? Dow was still looking at me. He hesitated. I just waited. He finally responded, yes. At this juncture, I just started to repeat myself, revisiting the areas in which Dow's explanations made no sense. You didn't know it was Stephen? No. I don't understand how the fire could have started. Dow broke down into what appeared to be deep sobs. There were no tears, just deep breaths, dry, deep breaths. I immediately stopped asking him questions. I looked at him. I wasn't sure what to do. I stood up and slowly walked towards him. When I reached him, I placed both of my hands on his shoulders. As soon as I touched his shoulders, he stopped this impression of sobbing and became very quiet and still. I stood like that for a few moments. He didn't say anything nor do anything. He just sat there with his hands still clasped together and silent. When I felt like it was safe to do so, I removed my hands and sat down beside him, but behind him. My back was up against the couch. He was still sitting on the edge of the couch. I replaced my hands on his shoulder. We both sat there silently. After a few moments, Dow spoke. He continued staring intently ahead of him. If you ever tell anyone what I just told you, if you ever tell anyone this, then I will... Dow was silent and kept staring resolutely in front of him. I kept my hands on his shoulders. I didn't dare move. After a few moments passed, I spoke quietly in an even, firm tone. What will you do if I ever tell anyone this? Dow didn't respond. A few moments passed. Dow still hadn't responded. I wanted to know how he was going to end this sentence. I needed to hear him finish what he had begun. I leaned forward far enough so that I could look directly at his eyes, knowing that he would see me watching him. Quietly but firmly, I asked him again, what will you do if I ever tell anyone this? Dow slowly turned his head and looked at me straight in the eyes. We held eye contact for what seemed to be an eternity, but it was only a few moments. My eyes did not waver or turn away. He broke eye contact and turned away, shrugged his shoulders, and stated in a nonchalant but firm tone, I'll just deny it. Slowly, I removed my hands from his shoulders. I brought them down and rested them in my lap. We were both silent. He remained sitting on the edge of the couch with his hands clasped together, eyes staring straight ahead. It was at this moment that I began to realize that Dow did not feel any sense of sadness, torment, guilt, remorse, etc. How he had ended this revelation seemed to be incongruent with any of those emotions. And if you ever tell anyone what I just told you, then I will shrug. I'll just deny it. Where was the guilt, the sorrow, the torment, the remorse? There was no fear in that statement in his voice or in his body language. It was a matter of fact. How could he just deny it? What did this mean? I instantly became wary. I calmly asked, why would you say that? I'm not going to write out and tell anyone this. You know me better than that. I hardly talk to anyone about anything. You know that. Dow responded, I'm tired. I want to go to bed now. I got up and went into the kitchen. I picked up the picture of Stephen, his senior picture. I looked at it. I studied Stephen's eyes, wondering if I could see anything in his eyes. Maybe the picture picked something up that would tell me that he had killed his mother. I didn't see anything. I threw the picture away. I picked up the glass. We went to bed. He slept peacefully. I didn't fall asleep for a long time. I watched him sleep. I listened to him sleep. I wondered if he would be restless or if this would torment him in his sleep. There were no signs of either. He slept serenely, like he did after his explosions at night. I kept thinking about what he had told me, going over and over it in my mind. So much of it didn't make any sense. If it had happened as he said, why had he covered it up? The morning arrived. I waited to see if he would bring this up. He didn't. He behaved as if the night before had never happened. His usual response, as if what he had revealed was as insignificant as if he had announced the night before that it was dark outside. I waited until early afternoon. I finally brought the subject up. I had absolutely no doubt that Jen and Stephen had not died in an accident as publicly reported. I asked him questions. There was a number of things that didn't make sense. How could Stephen have been unaware of Dow coming up behind him? Stephen must have known Dow was home and heard him downstairs putting coal in the stove. The house wasn't that big. Why would Stephen be only focused on killing Janet? Why wouldn't he have been on guard against Dow's approach? Why hadn't he taken care of Dow first, as Dow would have been the bigger threat? How could Dow not have known it was Stephen he was attacking? Dow had said that the room was dark, but he could see a figure standing over Jan. Dow had also said that he had been in the living room watching TV before going downstairs to put coal in the stove. Dow hadn't gone to bed yet. The cellar light might have been on. Lights on the main floor must have been on. The master bedroom was on the main floor, and it was a very dark room even during daylight hours. A light source must have been lighting up Stephen's form. How could Dow not have recognized Stephen? Dow must have blocked the light source at some point. How could Stephen not have reacted to this alarm? How could Stephen not have been expecting Dow and been prepared? How could Dow not have heard Stephen walking down the stairs or on the floorboards right above him? Why would Stephen have used practice ammunition instead of real ammunition? Why would Stephen have brought out a pile of the practice ammunition and placed them on a table outside of the bedroom? Why wasn't the gun in Stephen's hands? Why was it on the table outside of the bedroom next to the pile of ammunition? Why hadn't the bullet holes shown up in the autopsy? A car doesn't burst into flames when it's just rolled off a road. Why was Dow not being straightforward about how the fire started? What else was he not representing honestly? Why would Stephen kill his mother? I began to ask Dow questions. Following are some of those questions and his responses. Why would Stephen want to kill his mother? I don't know. Was he angry with his mother a lot? No. Do you think that Stephen wanted to kill both of you? I don't know. Why would Stephen kill Janet while you were home? Do you think that he thought both of you were sleeping and the second shot was meant for you? I don't know. Did Stephen use drugs? No. Do you think that maybe he had started to use drugs and was high at the time? No. Who did Stephen hang around with? What kind of kids? The Bentons, not bad kids. Didn't Stephen know that you were home? Wouldn't he have heard you come in? I don't know. When you were downstairs putting coal in the stove, did Stephen hear you walking on the floor? No. Wouldn't you have heard him walking? Dow shrugged. Did Stephen watch a lot of TV? What kind? Music, what kind? Dow shrugged and said action movies, but didn't have an answer for the music. Stephen didn't hear you coming. He didn't know that you were coming up behind him. No. I finally asked him about the mattress. The mattress. Was Janet killed on the same mattress? The mattress that you had? You know, the one with the stain on it? The one that you had when I met you? Remember the one that I kept asking what the stain was from? Yes. I began to visibly react to this. I didn't want Dow to see my reaction. I was having a hard time controlling it, and he probably did see the beginnings of it. I looked away and was silent. I looked back at him. He was watching me in a focused manner. He said, "Let's go get something to eat." I left to go back to Claremont. I was convinced that Jan and Stephen had not died in a car accident as reported. But so much of what Dow represented didn't make any sense to me. I wasn't sure what to make of it or what to do. I was scared. I wondered how much of a threat I was to him and was very concerned that my son's life and my own were in danger. I instinctively knew that I needed to institute actions so that Dow would think I was not a threat to him. Based on everything I knew about Dow, it would not have been wise to be assertive or confrontational at that point. It was necessary to backtrack from any past confrontations, hoping to dissipate any grudges or resentments built up against me. It was important to appear as if I wholeheartedly believed the scenario he had presented to me until I had a chance to look at him through a new set of eyes and decipher who he truly was. For the time being, I needed to appear weak-minded and controllable. I needed to institute a non-direct approach in my response to Dow. I had to portray that I was enamored, that he didn't need... I was so enamored that he needn't worry. Over time, I learned that it was important to stay one step ahead of him, which meant I needed to observe and discover the way he thought. I had to learn the pattern to his logic, in essence, to learn how to think like he thought before I could respond to him. I wondered just whom it was I had committed myself to. I wondered just what that commitment required of me. I didn't know if the man I had fallen in love with was real. I wondered if he had ever been real. I needed to find out. I needed to immediately institute safety actions without him knowing I was doing so. I needed to know who Richard Dow truly was and knew that this would surface over time. I needed to let the truth surface and not fight it. The reality of Dow would surface on its own in a natural setting in its own time. Questions kept swirling around and around in my mind. Why had he covered it up? Why wouldn't he tell me how he started the fire? Why wasn't there a gun in Stephen's hands? Was this what was at the crux of his explosions, or was it something else? How could he have continued on in law enforcement? What was I supposed to do with this information? What were my moral and legal obligations? Who could I talk to in order to find out? So much was going through my head. What was the right way to respond to this? Most importantly, was the question, how would God want me to respond? I wanted to believe what he had told me, although I didn't know if the scenario he had presented qualified as self-defense. As horrible as the scenario he had related was, it would have been much better to deal with him if he had actually killed his wife and his adopted son. The questions kept swirling around and around in my mind. But if what he had told me was true, why had he covered it up? He was a law enforcement officer. I needed time to think, to keep Dow at bay and feeling safe, to protect my son and myself, to learn what my obligations were. I needed guidance. I wanted someone else to know, but who? The police? Dow was a police officer. Dow would be questioned, and Dow, as he had told me, would deny that he had told me this. And as experience had taught me, people listened to Dow. They would believe him. They wouldn't listen to me. Then what would happen? If I went to the police, then Dow would know I was a threat and he would kill me. I was in a state of turmoil. I did not want to be killed by Dow. I had to think this through. Dow was supposed to come to Claremont the next weekend. I didn't want him to come, but I didn't want him to know I was frightened of him. Frightened of this information, frightened to think what this meant in relation to my sons and my life. I had never let him see any fear from him in me, and I knew it would be a mistake to start now. I needed to implement caution even more so now, and I had to make sure I did not do anything that would alarm him. I didn't want him to come, but what could I say that would not alarm him? I decided to call Dow to tell him that if he had things to do and didn't want to make the trip that weekend, then it was okay with me because I had a lot of things to do, studying and things like that. Dao immediately asked, "Why don't you want me to come down? Are you afraid of me now?" Without hesitation, I evenly responded, "No, I'm not afraid of you. You can come down if you want to. I was just saying that if you had other things you wanted to do this weekend, it was okay with me because I have a lot of things that I have to do. That's all." Dao was paying attention. This was a break from my normal response. I had to be careful. I had to institute new responses in a gradual manner. Well, this was the beginning. Dao came down. Others knew that he was there. At some point during the weekend, Dao, my son, and I went for a ride. Dao drove to Newport, a neighboring town. He drove to and into the state park. The park was bigger than I thought it was. Wetlands, forest, and lake. He drove around for a while and then pulled over where the lake was. The park was deserted. He got out of the car and motioned for us to come out. We got out. I was frightened, nervous, and cautious, and trying very hard to not let it show. I didn't know why Dao was stopping here. It wasn't like him to come to a place like this. It wasn't Dao's kind of place. Someone drove by and stopped nearby. I felt a sense of relief. As long as someone was nearby, then we were safe. We left shortly afterwards. He took us out to eat. At the end of the weekend, Dao left without either one of us speaking directly about what he had told me. From that point on, I would never meet Dao anywhere unless it was a public place or where people were nearby and within hearing distance. In our homes, others knew that Dao was present, and Dao knew this. If we were going anywhere, I made a point that people knew I was with Dao and that Dao knew that others knew. From past observations and knowledge of Dao, I knew that he would not implement any overt and blatant action against us as long as his presence with us was known or could be noticed or discovered by others. By the same token, I knew that Dao could set up an accident, in quotes. I had to talk to someone in confidence. As a safety valve, I knew that it would be important to let Dao know that someone else knew. That someone would have to be someone credible, but yet one who Dao would be convinced was not a threat. I had ruled the police out. I thought about talking with a psychologist, but didn't have any money to pay for one at the time, nor did I think, from what I knew of Dao, that he would have responded positively to that. A psychologist would have been too much of a threat. I thought about and decided upon going to a priest. It was extremely important to me that I fulfill my own moral and legal obligations. I believed that a priest was the perfect choice all the way around. I also hoped that at some point Dao would initiate going to speak to a priest for guidance himself, although in retrospect that was a foolish hope, for if Dao had been struggling with the moral issues involved, he would have initiated that step a long time ago. I asked another person who they thought would be a good priest to speak to about something very serious. They recommended Father Sean Therian. I arranged to speak with Father Therian. We met at the rectory. It was an early evening on a weeknight. We spoke in a sitting room. I told Father what Dao had revealed to me. I explained that I needed to know what my moral and legal obligations were. Father informed me that if what Dao had told me was true, then Dao had acted in self-defense and that he was the only injured party still left alive. Therefore, I was under no obligation to bring this information forward to law enforcement authorities either legally or morally. Father told me that he would check this out with another priest in another state to make sure what he advised was accurate. Father continued by saying that all Dao would be guilty of was not reporting truthfully how Jan and Stephen had died to authorities. Father emphasized that Dao was the only injured party left alive. I didn't understand this, but let it be. There was so much I didn't understand. He asked if I would be able to get Dao in to speak directly with him. I told him I would try. I had not told Dao that I was going to speak with Father, knowing it would not be prudent to let him know beforehand. It was a relief that Father had a desire to speak directly with Dao. I broke the news to Dao over the phone. I told Dao that I had gone to speak with someone about what he had told me about Jan and Stephen. Dao was silent. I told him I had gone to speak with a priest. He was still silent. I stated that I needed to find out what my moral and legal obligations were. Dao was still silent. I could not see his expression, and this deep silent reaction was very frightening. I quickly told Dao that Father had advised that I was under no legal or moral obligation to report this to the police. Dao was still not saying a word. I told Dow that the priest wanted to speak with him. I began jabbering off the cuff that the priest would be interested in the state of his soul, that he wasn't the police, and that he would care about how this was affecting him, and not be interested in seeing him get into trouble. I asked Dow if he would meet with Father. Dow was silent. I reiterated that I had already told Father and what Father's response had been. Dow was still silent. I finally just told him that I needed to let Father know what his answer was. Dow finally responded. He stated he would think about it. I told Dow I would hold off on speaking with Father until we spoke again. Our conversation ended. I believe it was the next night that Dow and I spoke again via the phone. In that conversation, Dow told me he had decided he would meet with the priest. Later, I told him that he needed to call Father himself to set up a time, and I gave him the phone number. Dow set up a time to meet with Father. The night that Dow was to meet Father, he came to my house first. It was a weekday evening. He left for the meeting. He was gone 1 to 2 hours. After the meeting, Dow came back to my house. He told me that he had spoken to Father and that he had told Father the same thing that he had told me. Dow then asked if I knew who Father Terrian's own father was. I responded no and asked who he was. Dow told me he was Armand Therian, a New Hampshire state trooper who had performed a hit for the mob, had been caught, and was now serving a life sentence at Walpole Prison in Massachusetts. Wow, you can't make this stuff up. Dow told me that he had spent much of his meeting with Father speaking about Father's own father. I brought the subject back to Jan and Stephen. Dow told me that Father wanted him to speak to a counselor that he knew. I asked him if he was going to do that. Dow said he hadn't decided. Dow never did. I saw Father the next Sunday after Mass. I approached him. For my own peace of mind, I needed to check to make sure that Dow had actually met with him and spoken to him. I also needed to make sure that I was under no moral or legal obligation to report what Dow had told me to the police. Father confirmed that he had met with Dow and that Dow had spoken to him about how Jan and Stephen died. That Dow had told him what I had told him. Father also confirmed that I was not obligated to go to the police with this information. I really didn't understand Father's response. I didn't understand the self-defense representation. I still thought a lot of what Dow had told me just didn't make sense, but I didn't push it. I grasped on to what Father had told me, that if it was as Dow had told me, well, then he was not a danger to anyone, right? He was not a danger to me, my son, or anyone else. Father believed him. Maybe I should just accept it and leave it at that. But Dow knew that what he had represented wasn't true, and he wanted me to know that. In retrospect, I know that Dow got a kick out of terrorizing me. He was playing with me. He wanted me to know that he had killed Jan and Stephen and had gotten away with it. He wanted me to know that he could kill me and Matthew and get away with it. He wanted me to know that in the end it was he who had all the control, that it would be he who had all the power because he could kill and I could not. A few weeks later, Dow was down in Claremont. We were in his vehicle. Neither of us had brought up the subject of Jan and Stephen's deaths since he had spoken with Father. Out of the blue, Dow suddenly said, I remember yelling at Stephen while I was attacking him. I won't let you do this to me. You can't do this to me, over and over again. I was startled. I looked at him. Dow was intently staring straight ahead. I said, I thought you didn't know it was Stephen when you attacked him. Dow visibly pulled back and responded, oh, pause, I didn't. I knew that there was much more to what he had told me. I wanted to believe that he was the injured party and that Jan and Stephen had died as he had said. But even though others might be satisfied with his explanation, there were too many things that just didn't add up in my mind. Dow had a history of lying and manipulating circumstances to benefit him. He had a history of being deceptive. I finally decided that I had an obligation in all of this, to all of us, including Dow, to learn who he really was. It was so critical for my son's and my safety, for others' safety, to discover who Richard Dow really was. I also knew that if he were a killer, then I would always remain a threat to him while I was alive by virtue of the information he had relayed to me. Dow's violence. How do you think Jan and Stephen really died, Karen? And apparently this website was created, at least in part, by Karen. going over all this information. I remember during the first 4 years of our relationship, Richard Dow exhibited bizarre, violent, threatening, deceptive, isolating, callous, and indifferent behavior. I remember Dow's lies, his threats, his shaking fist in my face, watching him violently punch himself in his face or chest, and hearing him shout at me, "Do you know what I'd like to do to you right now? Do you know what I feel like doing to you right now? This and this and this." I remember standing so still that he would angrily pick up household objects and throw them in my direction, and feeling the relief I felt when the flying objects missed me. Dow angrily stomping out, and when he returned, listening to him tell me that he destroys things he likes. I remember my intense feelings of anxiety when he would angrily screech off in his truck, disappearing for hours on end, and be so worried that he would end up hurting himself or someone else. The cruel silence, cold unresponsiveness, and callous indifference he displayed when my son skidded on some sand in the road and fell off his bike on the roadway, laying hurt and crying right in front of him. I remember the times he would erupt and then end up curling up into a tight little ball, warning me not to come near, to not touch him right then. Listening to him tell me how he felt an overwhelming sense of powerlessness, that he had no control, that he had no power, that he had no control, that I had all the power, that I had all the control. I remember the day the three of us were in the car on a family day adventure when out of the blue he erupted over something I had said. He exited the highway, turned the car around and said, "We're not going anywhere now," drove home without saying another word, parked the car, got out of the car, slammed the door, and walked away. Listening to him blame me for decisions he made which he later regretted, for mistakes he made for his eruptions. I remember over time I recognized that Dow's eruptions were deliberately contrived and were controlled. I recognized that the purpose of these eruptions were meant to intimidate, to bully, to control, and to give him the feeling of power he craved so much. When I began to stop reacting to his explosions, right away his actions became more emphasized and began to escalate. I remember listening to him tell me that he only acted this way in one other place, and that was as a law enforcement officer when he felt threatened. I remember listening to him yell at me that I was a threat to him, that I was a threat to his psyche. The time Dow erupted, threatened me, and then stood up. I stood up too. He pushed me down. I scrambled back up. My instincts told me to immediately move in instead of running away from him. My instincts told me to immediately respond in a strong but not physical manner. I moved in very close, looking him squarely in the eye, and stated very seriously, pointedly, calmly, and evenly, not to ever touch me like that again. He backed off. I remember my son to this day speaks about one episode he vividly remembers that took place before he was 10. He describes it as Dow being angry and yelling. He watched as Dow picked up a cactus and threw it at me. I remember trying to speak with Dow about these things time and time again. Dow never claimed any responsibility for his conduct. He always found something else to blame his conduct on, including me. Living each day in a state of intense fear. I remember thinking Dow wanted to kill me. I became convinced Dow would kill me. I worried he might try to poison me. I became very cautious about what my son and I ate and began implementing safety measures regarding food. When my fear began to manifest itself into physical symptoms, I became just about paralyzed with my fear of Dow and thought a heart attack was imminent. I began to see a doctor. Dow continued his violent and bizarre behavior. I remember wondering if I was crazy and being irrational. I remember not wanting to die, but at the same time wanting to die so that I could be free, and having to fight the urge to take control of when and how I died, away from Tao and away from God. I remember I had never witnessed this type of behavior from anyone before in my life. I could find no logic for his behavior. My street instincts, gut instincts, had began to strongly come into play. I couldn't understand why. My street instincts were telling me to be in a constant state of alert. That Tao had a desire to hurt me, to kill me. I could not reconcile my street instincts with my intellectual mind. He had been a law enforcement officer, for goodness sakes. He was a good guy, right? He respected and had upheld the law, hadn't he? I began to think there was something wrong with me, not him. I remember the day I invited a friend over for lunch. Tao was not supposed to be home. He was supposed to be out working. Dow knew she was coming. She was highly knowledgeable about and involved in domestic violence issues. Dow did not know why I really wanted to see her, but he knew her background and that I had been trying to understand his explosions for so long. I needed to speak about my fear. I needed to find out why my street instincts were coming out so strongly. I needed to find out if I was being irrational, to find out if I was going crazy, to try and make sense out of all of this. Was it me? Was it him? What was this? Help me understand. Dow didn't leave the house that day. He decided not to work. When my friend arrived, he sat with us and took over the conversation and began speaking about domestic violence issues. He spoke about how strongly he stood against it and mentioned domestic violence incidents he had responded to as a law enforcement officer. She seemed to be buying into it. I knew she had when he arranged a public speaking date with her to talk about domestic violence to a group. A light went out in me. I felt so alone. No one would believe me. No one would be able to help me. I responded to this feeling out of despair as I had done when I was young. I just turned my head away, stood up without saying a word, and walked away. I left the room. I didn't return. I knew Dow was not going to let me talk to her alone. He would charm anyone he set out to charm, even my most knowledgeable friend, or so I thought and believed at the time. I went into one of the bedrooms and busied myself with doing some cleaning in an attempt to distract myself. I went to the furthest point in the house away from Dow. When it came time for my friend to leave, she found me in this bedroom. It was time for her to leave, and she had come to find me to say goodbye. She had noticed the manner in which I had departed the room. A red flag. She asked me if anything was wrong. I responded that I couldn't talk about it now. There's no time to talk about it now, and there's really no use in talking about it now. She was hesitant about leaving, but did. I didn't walk her to the door. After she was gone, Dow approached me, looked me square in the eye, and stated something along the lines, "That was a nice visit, don't you think?" Silently, I turned away. I wanted to cry, to give up, but crying would do no good. It had never made a difference in my life, ever. I remembered how a long time ago when I was young, during a critical moment in my life, I had cried and my vulnerability was exposed and there was no comfort given, only indifference. I had made myself a promise to never cry again. No one would ever see how vulnerable I was ever again. I would not cry in front of Dow. I was determined not to satisfy him by letting him know how deeply this had touched and affected me. The memory of that young girl who had felt so alone, vulnerable, broken, and was so uncertain about her future served to remind me that somehow I would and could make it, even if I had to do it alone. Plus, I was not alone in this environment. There was Matthew, my son. I could not give up. I remember many years later, just several months before I came forward, I reconnected with this friend. She brought up this lunch. She told me that after I had left the room, she had asked Dow what was wrong. Dow told her he didn't know what was wrong with me. She asked him if he had tried to speak with me about it. He responded that he had, but that I wouldn't tell him what was wrong. I remember not being able to figure out where the rages came from or what triggered them. When I finally began to reject Dow's claim that I or something else was responsible for his behavior, I remember Dow had been trying to re-enter into law enforcement for years. He finally gained part-time work as a law enforcement officer for Twin Mountain Police Department. When he wasn't on duty or around others, Dow was intensely sullen, dour, and sulky. He stopped taking care of himself, unkempt, unshaven, a crazy look in his eyes. At this point, we were living in a trailer located on my parents' campground. My parents' house was within earshot, and people were always nearby in the campground. His reactions changed from eruptions to deep moroseness. I couldn't handle the environment of our home life and Dow's responses anymore. Something had to change. I made a decision that it would be best for us to separate. Before leaving, I called a good friend of Dow's. I told him I was leaving, moving far away, and re-entering school. I explained that I was highly concerned about Dow, that Dow didn't look good, was not physically taking care of himself, and asked if he would call Dow in the near future and make sure he was okay. During this conversation, this individual, out of the blue, stated that he remembered when Jan and Stephen died. He stated that he and Dow had been riding around one night in his cruiser, and out of the blue, Dow intensely had said, "I can't keep this to myself anymore. I have to tell someone this." They were interrupted. Dow never finished. He continued by telling me that the tone and intensity was the type that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. He asked me if I knew anything about that or what it might mean. I didn't. Our conversation ended. He promised to get in touch with Dow in the near future. I took my son and relocated to Claremont, New Hampshire. I re-entered into college studying interpreting for the deaf. Dow stayed in Twin Mountain. Dow and I had maintained contact. Although we were separated, there was much we had vested into the relationship, and we would visit back and forth. During one of my son's and my visits to him, Dow made the following statements to me. It was late at night, and we were both sitting in the living room on opposite sides of the room. My son was sleeping at my parents' house. We were not arguing, nor were we speaking about Jan and Stephen. Neither of us had been drinking. And of course, this is what we already went over just now. I remember Dow asking me how I was able to hold up and keep functioning in school and with my studies as a parent and my volunteer work under all the stress and with everything that was going on. Within months of Dow telling me this information, he began to look for a law enforcement position in the Claremont area. He obtained full-time employment with the Lebanon, New Hampshire Police Department. The chief of the department was a former New Hampshire state trooper. I remember when we began our move into the house in Lebanon when he was leaning against a doorframe of the office watching me organize the room. Suddenly he said, "You know I can get rid of you anytime I want to." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him. We maintained eye contact for a few moments. I then responded in even tone, "You would do that? You would deliberately, with forethought, set out to get rid of me?" He didn't respond. I asked, "Is that who you are? Would you deliberately set out to do something like that?" He responded, "I just wanted you to know." He then turned on his heel and left the room. In the 4 or 5 years that I had known him, I had never seen him buy or even pick up a book to read. And then suddenly he always had this one book in his hand. And the day he laid it folded open on a table in the family room, I picked it up to see what he was reading. It was about someone who had killed his whole family with an axe. I asked him why he was reading a book like that. He responded, "To help me with my work." I remember when Dow told me that the psychological exam required of all incoming Lebanon police officers found that he had the perfect personality to be a cop. He had covered up the true nature of Jan and Stephen's deaths. He wasn't honest. I wondered, just what does this examination examine? When Dow hid in the darkness observing while a domestic violence incident was occurring in a neighbor's residence, while I, thinking Dow was right with me, approached and diverted the attention of the male aggressor until the police arrived. I was surprised that Dow had not stayed with me and that he had disappeared, especially since he had begun to speak about how dangerous domestic violence situations were. Dow disappeared into the darkness. I debated whether I should approach. I felt like I was on my own. The male aggressor noticed me. His attention focused on me. He asked me who I was. I decided retreating would not be a good idea, so I walked towards him in a non-threatening and relaxed manner. He became curious. His attention was diverted. We spoke for a few minutes. The police arrived. A few minutes later, Dow came sauntering out of the bushes. On our walk back to our house, I asked him why he disappeared like that. Hiding in the bushes, he responded, "Because you should never walk into a domestic violence situation alone. They're very dangerous, and either one of the parties could turn on you." I asked, "Why did you let me walk into the situation alone then? Why didn't you tell me you were going to do that?" He shrugged. I remember Dow began to enter into one of his rages. I backed myself up to the storm door, putting my hand behind me, placing it on the door latch. Dow was shouting what he wanted me to do. I stood still, watching him to see how he would end this tirade this time. Suddenly, he shot towards me with his closed fist shaking in front of him. I was frozen, focusing on his eyes. Right before he reached me, he took a hard swing, punching a cupboard door, and hurt his fist. He got angrier. He came right up to me and swung. My head jerked back. His fist went right in front of my face and slammed through a glass pane on the inside door that was right beside me, right next to my face. My eyes kind of rolled, and I turned my head away from Dow as I pushed the door latch on the storm door. The door opened, and in what felt like one fluid moment, I was out of there. Once I was outside, I felt safe. I did not look back. I walked straight to my car, got in, and drove off. The only thought in my head was to get away from him. After driving for a few minutes, I began to come out of my frozen state and began to think again. I knew Dow had been hurt. Then I began to feel guilty because I had driven off without making sure that he was all right. I drove back just to make sure he was okay. When I drove in, Dow was outside with a towel wrapped around one hand. It was bleeding. His other hand was hurt. He had called a friend of his to come bring him to the clinic. I drove him in. At the clinic, the nurse asked how he had hurt himself. Dow told her he had been carrying some glass outside, slipped on the ice, and fell. I turned away. She treated his cut hand but told him he would have to go to the hospital to see if any bones were broken in his other hand. I drove him to the hospital. We didn't speak. At the hospital, the doctor told Dow that he had a broken bone in his hand. The doctor asked him how he had broken his hand. Dow told him the same story he told the nurse. I was watching Dow, and like I had done with the nurse, my only response was to turn away. The doctor looked Dow straight in the eyes and stated, "There's only one way that you can break that particular bone, and that's by taking a swing." The doctor asked him if he had thrown a punch. Dow put on a sheepish look, looked down, and said yes. The doctor stated, "Now you're not going to do that again, right?" Dow responded, "I won't." The doctor left. We left. On the ride home, Dow began to say, "Karen, you know that I would never hurt you or Matthew." I didn't respond. I had nothing to say to him. He said it again. I still didn't respond. He looked right at me and said, "Karen, I would never hurt you or Matthew. You believe me, don't you?" I turned my head and looked at him. I simply responded, "No, I don't believe you anymore." I looked away. So many lies, so many cover-ups. Truth did not matter to Dow at all. I remember the violence, the threats, the warnings. How sometimes Dow would violently pound his chest and shout that I had no idea what kind of expletive was in him. How he communicated to me that he felt like killing. How he had told me that he had been diagnosed as lacking empathy, the definition of a sociopath. How I became so concerned over strong indicators that he may be going through the process of selecting another victim right in front of me. How I needed to divert his focus away from others. How Dow told me that a psychiatrist had wanted him on medication, but that he didn't want to take it. And then how Dow would make statements that maybe he should go on the medication and then not doing it. When I told a friend of mine in confidence about this, she was a counselor. When I spoke to a psychologist in confidence about this, when I spoke to another priest in confidence about all this, and when I finally arrived at the conclusion that it was necessary to come forward to law enforcement with the information that I had. So much to remember. I looked and saw, I listened and heard, I watched and learned. I experienced, I discovered, and now I know the truth of Richard Dow. I came forward because the deaths of Jan and Stephen Dow needed to be investigated by law enforcement. The true nature of their deaths needed to be discovered and addressed. I needed to learn the truth about their deaths, and now I know how Jan and Stephen really died. And there was media coverage on this all throughout the years, and how about that there might have been a cover-up and all of these things. So throughout the years, they kind of refused to indict him, and then the sentiment has changed a bit. Here's an article from 1998, Associated Press by David Terrell Wysocki. Lawmakers seek third probe of 1982 deaths. Concord, New Hampshire. 15 years ago, the wife and son of a former state trooper were found dead in a burning car. Despite what police thought at first, it was no accident. Ultimately, investigators concluded that the victims were either dead or incapacitated before the wreck, and that the crash was staged. But the state closed its second investigation into the case last fall, saying there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. Now lawmakers are pressing for a special committee to look into whether there was a cover-up to protect the former trooper Richard Dow or his one-time commander. There is no statute of limitations on a yearning for justice, said State Rep Rennie Cushing, sponsor of a bill to launch the committee investigation. People still grieve. The charred bodies of Janet Dow, 40, and her son Stephen, 18, were found in Thornton, a small town about 40 miles north of Concord, on a frigid morning in December 1982. State police that concluded the deaths were accidental, relying mostly on information from Dow, who was working as a part-time officer in Thornton. Dow said he was home when his wife and adopted son drove off that morning. There were no autopsies. The state fire marshal wasn't called, and the car released to Dow soon after the deaths was quickly destroyed. Officers didn't note or follow up conflicts between the evidence and Dow's account. Based on what Dow said, police concluded that the victims burned to death when their car careened off the road near their home and exploded into flames, supposedly from a bucket of gasoline that Stephen had left in the car because it held a carburetor he was taking to have repaired. The troopers also concluded that the victims could not escape because both were hit by bricks that, again, according to Dow, had been placed in the car to add weight to improve traction. The case remained closed until 1993, when Dow's girlfriend, Karen Safian, said Dow had told her that he had killed his son with an axe. After the teenager murdered his mother, Dow staged the accident, Safian said. Safian believes that Dow killed them both and that the police might have looked the other way. The original 1982 investigation was conducted by the state police troop where Dow had worked, and Safian said she believes that the commander, Richard Tuck, steered investigators away from Dow, fearing that Dow would divulge that Tuck fixed tickets. Tuck called the suggestion a complete lie. Police have said Dow, 53, lives in another New England state, but will not say which one. He has an unlisted telephone number and has not returned messages left with his father. Safian said she believes that the second investigation ended to avoid embarrassing the state police. State police and prosecutors concede that mistakes were made in 1982, but assert that officers saw no signs of a crime. Based on photos of the original crash and 2 reenactments, the second investigation found that rather than speeding off the road, the car essentially was tipped into the ditch and then set afire. Ronald Pennington, a former officer in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, who helped solve a murder that involved a police cover-up, said prosecutors have more than enough evidence to file charges based on the second investigation, which was led by State Police Sergeant Benjamin Masro. When you look at that first investigation, it was just awful, Pennington said. But when you see what an exemplary job Masro did, why hasn't something happened here? What's the problem? Masro, who retired last fall, referred questions to Assistant Attorney General Mark Zuckerman, who said there is not enough evidence to prosecute. Even though reasonable folks could agree there may be probable cause to charge somebody, there certainly is not sufficient proof to obtain a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt, and it would not be proper for me to go forward as a prosecutor on evidence I know to be deficient, he said last fall. Cushing acknowledged that his bill is unlikely to lead to criminal charges, but said he wants to find the truth anyway. I would like to see, ultimately, the committee come to conclusions about whether or not Dow did kill his wife, review the evidence, so at least the public knows. And that's a very reasonable position because, again, even if he doesn't get convicted, at least the truth will be known, so it's not just swept under the rug, and the truth can be, and evidence can at least be heard regardless of whether it leads to a conviction or not. Here's another article, Associated Press. This was posted July 18th, 2009, updated August 4th, 2009. New Hampshire law keeps murder case liars on the hook forever. Concord, New Hampshire. This Rennie Cushing is convinced a former New Hampshire state trooper got away with murder. So the state representative from Hampton sponsored a law that will have people looking over their shoulders for the rest of their lives if they've lied about a murder or helped cover one up. The law removes the statute of limitations or deadline for when people can be prosecuted for crimes related to murders. They include such infractions as falsifying evidence, threatening witnesses, or lying. New Hampshire is one of the few states with such a law, and Cushing hopes it becomes a model for other states. Relatives of murder victims, including himself, yearn for justice, he said, and new technology is is helping to uncover the truth years after crimes were committed. There is no limit on charging someone with murder, but laws across the country commonly let people off the hook after a few years for lesser offenses, such as backing a false alibi of a murder suspect. That will no longer be the case in New Hampshire starting January 1st. It's one thing if you give false information about somebody stealing a bike. It's another thing if you give false information about somebody stealing someone's life, Cushing said. Prosecutors do not envision jailing a lot of people for obstruction who obstructed investigations, but they hope the lifelong threat of prison will prompt some to tell what they know. It gives us another tool to use with witnesses who are reluctant and may act as a deterrent to people if they think that if they can withhold information and enough time goes by that they'll be immune from prosecution, said Senior Attorney General Jeffrey Strelzin. Now they'll know they won't be, so there will be some incentive there, hopefully for people to be more cooperative and more truthful. Cushing said the law could also help put killers in prison, at least for short sentences. For example, prosecutors can use the law if investigators discover a murder suspect tampered with evidence, but they couldn't find enough evidence to bring a murder charge. Cushing said he was inspired by the case of Janet Dow and her stepson, Stephen. Their bodies were found in their burned car in northern New Hampshire in December 1982. Investigators accepted an explanation from Janet's husband, Richard, a local police officer and former state trooper, that the two had sped away from their Thornton home and crashed, likely igniting an open container of gasoline he said the son had placed in the car. A decade later, authorities discredited Dow's account, saying they believed the Dows were murdered and the crash staged. Richard Dow was the target of the investigation, but the Attorney General said there was not enough evidence to charge anyone. Strelzin said he couldn't comment on specific open cases, but Cushing said the new law would have helped. When police subsequently uncovered the fact that it was a homicide instead of an accident, Dow could not be prosecuted for what were obvious false statements made to law enforcement, Cushing said. Dow has consistently refused to comment on the allegations. Cushing said personal experience also drove him. His father was murdered on his doorstep in 1988 by a police officer neighbor with a grudge. The officer then consoled the family as he pretended to help track down the killer. You never lose your longing for justice, Cushing said. I don't believe people should be allowed to get away with murder. And then they go on to talk about laws in other states and such. But yeah, this is all very troubling. Very, very troubling that it still hasn't been effectively resolved. So let's finish with Safian's account. This is from the website here. In 1993, I, Karen Safian, came forward to authorities in the state of New Hampshire with the information Dow had given me in the spring of 1993. That information identified that Jen and Stephen Dow had not died in a Fury motor vehicle accident, but were rather killed in their home. That Richard Dow admitted that he was directly involved in the killings and had staged the accident. I first reported what Dow had told me to Lieutenant Jellison, commander of Troop F. Instead of responding to the information with the seriousness that it deserved, Lieutenant Jellison attempted to trivialize and dismiss it, going so far as to give an investigative conclusion without conducting any serious investigation, warning me that my son's life and my own would be in grave danger if this incident were looked into, and then leaving it up to me to decide whether this matter should be investigated. Wow. Wow. And to the people, again, who are looking at the Maura Murray case or other cases, if a police officer is responsible, all of these authority-worshipping cultists who deny all corruption and how things work, that there's any kind of a blue line or a blue wall that does not like being punctured in any way and any kind of corruption exposed, these are the kinds of horror stories that make these goofballs look so silly, because there's corruption out there. People in uniforms also commit crimes, and other people don't necessarily want the microscope put on that. So no, there's no allegation here that Lieutenant Jellison was directly involved in any kind of cover up, but just the tone of which he was speaking to Karen Safian and wanting to prevent this going public in the first place. How insane is all of this and this entire process? I really wanted to give this case the attention it deserves because Karen Safian really needs to be heralded as a hero for going through all this. Because if she was just some kind of ex-girlfriend with a grudge, it seems unlikely she would have went through this entire process. Because usually when there's false statements like that, it's some quick attention seeking, some reporter in a news story, maybe a police statement, and then that's that. But here we do not have that. Now again, I don't know exactly what happened, but there seems to be a lot of issues here, and there's a lot of other individuals that are experts in police corruption and exposing police officer murders and cover ups that have found this to be the case in this case. So it is what it is in that regard. As a direct result of Lieutenant Jellison's response, my son and I entered into hiding. The New Hampshire Attorney General's office was notified. In turn, the New Hampshire State Police Major Crimes Unit was notified. Detective Sergeant Ben Mosrell was then placed in charge of investigating this incident. Sergeant Ben Mosrell had become a targeted man within the Division of State Police. Not only was he left unsupported in his investigation into this most serious matter, but he began experiencing acts of harassment, with obstructions being placed in his way by his superiors in the New Hampshire State Police. Complaints were filed during this time frame. To date, none of those complaints have been competently investigated. Where is internal affairs in all of this? I mean, there needs to be multiple internal affairs agencies to investigate this to make sure there's proper oversight. In spite of the harassment and obstructive acts, Detective Mosrell pushed forward and ended up solving the case. And also, like, obviously all the good cops and honest investigators out there, they're heroes as well, because all of these corruption deniers and coincidence theorists who defend, for example, the New Hampshire State Police or Haverhill Police in the Maura Murray case, they could learn a thing or two from Detective Mosrell, who actually honestly investigates despite all these roadblocks. His investigation demonstrated that Jan and Stephen Dow were murder victims. The car accident was staged, the fire set, and the perpetrator, Richard Dow. And you know what's also scary to think about? A lot of cases and investigations, they don't have someone like Detective Mosrell. They don't have someone with integrity to objectively and honestly investigate. They have people who cave to the harassment. So in all these other cases where corruption is suspected in some kind of way, how often is it honestly and objectively investigated? And even for Mosrell's work, again, there was no official case or prosecution, but at least he was able to do a thorough investigation and come to these conclusions, even if there was no actual conviction as a result. Detective Mosrell's investigation into this matter also demonstrated that this incident was deliberately botched in 1982. At one point, the New Hampshire Attorney General's office was preparing to go forward to a grand jury with this case, but then abruptly decided not to move forward. Interesting. The case was solved, yet the New Hampshire Attorney General's office refused to act. The New Hampshire Governor's Office brushed this matter off, and while a good number of New Hampshire legislators reacted seriously to this matter and attempted to have the conduct of the Department of Safety, New Hampshire State Police, and the Attorney General's Office seriously scrutinized, other key legislators implemented actions to aid in keeping this matter from being examined. Detective Mosrell retired from the New Hampshire State Police after years of dealing with harassment and obstructive acts implemented by his superiors. The Dow case was then handed to Corporal William McGee, who did nothing with the case except aid his superiors in their resolve to keep the case from moving forward. To date, top officials in the state of New Hampshire continue to keep this case under wraps, refusing to bring it out into the light of day. And was Lieutenant Leo Jellison ever reprimanded for threatening a potential victim? It's insane. And Lieutenant Jellison never even took a statement. He never called in a detective to interview Karen. Lieutenant Jellison treated my reporting of 2 killings in a staged accident as if it were a trivial and frivolous matter. He sent my son and me right back into an extremely dangerous situation without blinking an eyelash. If we had been killed, there was no record of what I had reported to him. And this is just obvious. She's got on her website a list of all these complaints. And honestly, it's so tough to even go through them because, I mean, at least there was a guy like Masral who was actually willing to do his job. But all of these other individuals are just, it's just rough. And all of these corrupt officers and just officers and troopers who allowed this to occur and then engaged in a cover up. Again, it wasn't that they were directly involved. I don't think anyone is alleging that they were there with Dow and involved in the murder. It's just after the fact, there always seems to be this extreme reluctance. I mean, you could see by Art Roderick just basically going on the Oxygen show, admittedly, just to put to bed any kind of theories about police corruption, not to find the truth, not to do honest investigation, but to put to bed theories that he finds uncomfortable, or New Hampshire law enforcement not to look incompetent or bad or corrupt in any fashion. That's their priority, not to actually solve cases. And she submitted a whole bunch of complaints to the commissioners and all of these people with no responses. Very, very sad. But again, lies have speed, but the truth has endurance. So again, after all these years, at least it has come out to a certain capacity. Now, of course, from the area, the Bear Brook murder is very famous. We're not going to go into that. I haven't really seen any definitive links to the Maura Murray case there. Perhaps I'll do a dedicated podcast on that. There's a lot to go over there. Also, apparently, I actually don't even know where this came from at this point, but apparently Helena Murray said that in 2010, a 40-year-old man named Christopher Lynn disappeared not far from the scene of the accident, or the staged accident, near the Weathered Barn Corner in Haverhill, New Hampshire. Flynn was also from Massachusetts. From his missing poster here, age 40, hair brown, eyes hazel, 5'11", 210 pounds, last seen Westminster, Massachusetts, Haverhill, New Hampshire, May 30th, 2010. And the white 2000 Chevrolet electrician's van, which is owned by Flynn, was recovered from a remote wooded area in Haverhill, New Hampshire, after it had become stuck while traveling down an abandoned road. So here we have yet another abandoned vehicle and a missing person in Haverhill, New Hampshire. It is not known why Flynn was in Haverhill, New Hampshire, or if he was en route to Vermont. Anyone who may have seen him or had contact with a man of Flynn's description in the areas of Sinclair Road, Limekill Road, or Benton Road, Route 116, between Wednesday, June 2nd, 2010, and Sunday, June 2nd, 2010, contact Haverhill Police Department. So that's a few miles from the Weathered Barn Corner. Some people believe he was headed to Vermont. Similar characteristics to Maura Murray. Apparently James Renner might have mentioned this in his book as well. There's 2 articles here. Journal Opinion, June 9th, 2010. Search is on for missing man in Haverhill. The Haverhill Police Department and the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department are looking for a Massachusetts man after his van was found stuck on an abandoned road in North Haverhill on June 2nd. The man, Christopher Flynn, 40, of Westminster, Massachusetts, was reported missing by concerned family members on June 2nd, the same day the van was found on Sinclair Road off of Route 116, also known as Benton Road. A Haverhill police spokesperson said there is nothing suspicious about the incident, and it is being treated as a missing persons case. Is that their MO? It's just a DUI walk away. Nothing to investigate. According to a news release from the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department issued on June 6th, a white 2000 Chevrolet electrician's van, which is owned by Flynn, was recovered from a remote wooded area in Haverhill after it had become stuck while traveling down an abandoned road. Sinclair Road is near Black Mountain State Forest. Police and Fish and Game personnel do not know why Flynn was in Haverhill or whether he may have been en route to Vermont. Upon locating the van, Fish and Game personnel with assistance from New England Canine Search and Rescue Team Upper Value Wilderness Response Team and the Pemigewasset Valley Search and Rescue Team conducted a search, according to the news release. Since the discovery of the vehicle, Fish and Game personnel have been searching for Flynn, and Haverhill police have been canvassing the area around Limekiln Road, Sinclair Road, and Route 116 looking for information about his disappearance. Westminster Police Lieutenant Michael McDonald said he has no information regarding any connection Flynn may have had to Haverhill or the surrounding areas. That sound familiar? Or why his van turned up on a remote road in North Haverhill. He said he did not know if there were any friends or family in the area either. Westminster's involvement has essentially been limited to filing the missing persons report, which goes nationwide, and working with Flynn's family to learn more about his disappearance and any other information that might lead to his discovery. It is my understanding that he was going through some issues, McDonald said in a telephone interview with the Journal Opinion. We've been staying in contact with the family, with the Haverhill Police Department, and the New Hampshire Fish and Game. McDonald asked that anyone with information about Flynn or who has seen him to contact authorities. We want to check on him and make sure he's okay, McDonald said. According to the police news release, Flynn is between 5'10" to 5'11", 220 pounds, hazel eyes, brown hair with a receding hairline. Anyone with information is encouraged to call the Haverhill police. Flynn's disappearance is similar to the disappearance of Maura Murray, who disappeared after a minor car accident on Route 112 on February 9, 2004. Numerous extensive searches of the area failed to turn up any evidence about what may have happened to the 21-year-old college student from Hanson, Massachusetts. She remains missing to the present, and her disappearance is a mystery. So they even put that in the article there. In other articles, Cecil Smith is quoted. Chief Cecil Smith said witnesses are still being interviewed. An intensive search for Mr. Flynn is being conducted by Haverhill police. And some people have joked, so that's why he hasn't been found, because of former military intelligence officer Cecil Smith making these statements. Bizarre. So that leads people to believe, like, what is going on in this area? It's bizarre. Some people have also found that there's a few, that certain properties and land between these two scenes is owned by none other than he who cannot be named, the family of this one particular concrete guy individual that I have gone over in the past. I am sure it's all coincidental, as is everything in the Maura Murray case and all of these disappearances. So just statistically, all the cases I went over in this episode, in this very long episode, cases that need attention, cases that need to be solved, cases that need closure, statistically, it seems basically impossible that they are all related or that they all have the same perpetrator or perpetrators. There's nothing to suggest that. But some of them, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, there might be some intersecting lines, not even necessarily the same perpetrator, but possibly individuals who knew the perpetrator. That's the main point here. And of course, plenty more to cover, plenty more to ponder in the Maura Murray series. And this neck of the woods just does not seem to be a safe area. I will close this out with a post. I don't even know where this was posted. It looks like it was copy-pasted of other missing persons and other incidents in the area. This is quite comprehensive. Actually, I tracked it down. It was posted on Teresa Allore's website, teresaallore.com. I don't know if it's still up. You can go on Wayback Machine. And this was the unsolved murder of Teresa Allure, who died November 3rd, 1978, in eastern townships of Quebec. And they were discussing the Breonna Maitland case, the Maura Murray case, and there's a post here, a list of all the people who have gone missing from Vermont and New Hampshire over the past 25 years. Rachel Garden, missing from Newton, New Hampshire, southeast of Manchester, March 22nd, 1980. Russell Bovitt, missing from Last Resort Farm in Walden, Vermont, May 11th, 1986. Sonia Moore, missing from Stark Pond area of Dunbarton, New Hampshire, November 2nd, 1989. Sherry Hawkins, last seen Burlington Airport, Burlington, Vermont, January 18th, 1990. Heidi Dawn Wilbur, last seen at a convenience store in Middletown Springs, Vermont, February 9th, 1991. Audrey Grote, last seen at the Park and Ride in Northfield, Vermont, August 21st, 1993. Went over that. Bethany and Tina Sinclair, missing from Westchester, New Hampshire, February 4th, 2001. Hang Thai Phuong Nguyen, missing from Manchester, New Hampshire, March 16th, 2001. Lorne Richard Boulay Jr., last seen Perry Brook Road in Chichester, New Hampshire, July 29, 2001. Karen Shirley Dube, missing from Ware, New Hampshire, September 1st, 2001. Courtney King, missing from Pelham, New Hampshire, January 9th, 2004. Timothy James Young, last seen on Daniels Pond Road in West Glover, Vermont, January 20th, 2004. Maura Murray, last seen Route 112, Haverhill, New Hampshire, February 9th, 2004. Breonna Maitland, last seen Black Lantern Inn, Montgomery, Vermont, March 19th, 2004. Dominika Smolinski, missing from Westford, Vermont, August 27th, 2004. Jessica Ann Capil, missing from Bethlehem, New Hampshire, December 8th, 2004. List of unsolved murders in Vermont, New Hampshire, last 35 years. Joanne Dunham, Charleston, New Hampshire, October 1968. Jane Doe from Bedford, New Hampshire, October 6, 1971. Daniel O'Connell, Loudon, New Hampshire, October 30th, 1971. Kathy Glotty, Franklin, New Hampshire, November 22nd, 1971. Paul Olson, Madison, New Hampshire, March 24th, 1973. James Tedda, Ridge, New Hampshire, August 25th, 1973. Anne Pisardeles Diane Campagna, Raymond, New Hampshire, September 29th, 1973. Domingo Valdez, Pelham, New Hampshire, June 14th, 1974. Maurice and Ellen Wilkinson, Center Ossipee, August 16th, 1974. David Longfellow, Manchester, New Hampshire, November 24th, 1974. James O'Brien, New Boston, New Hampshire, April 12th, 1975. Judy Lord, Concord, New Hampshire, May 20th, 1975. Madeline Krause, Nashua, New Hampshire, February 27th, 1976. James Sullivan, Gilmanton, New Hampshire, February 24th, 1977. Joanne Gray Rogers, Hardwick, Vermont, July 15th, 1977. Sherry Lynn Roth, Livermore, New Hampshire, August 21st, 1977. Jacqueline Snyder, Lee, New Hampshire, September 4th, 1977. Pauline Miller Ray Blanchett, Manchester, New Hampshire, October 24th, 1978. Kathy Milliken, New London, New Hampshire, October 24th, 1978. Kenneth Jatch, Ware, New Hampshire, October 14th, 1979. Mary Elizabeth Critchley, Unity, New Hampshire, August 9th, 1981. Laura Kempton, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, September 28th, 1981. Mary Harrison, Winchester, New Hampshire, October 30th, 1981. Sylvia Gray, Plainfield, New Hampshire, May 28, 1982. Tammy Little, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, October 16, 1982. Bernice Courtemanche, Kellyville, New Hampshire, May 30th, 1984. Ellen Freed, Kellyville, New Hampshire, July 20th, 1984. Eva Morse, Unity, New Hampshire, July 10th, 1984. Linda Moore, Saxton River, Vermont, April 15th, 1986. Sarah Hunter, Paulet, Vermont, July 1986. Heidi Martin, Heartland, Vermont, May 1st, 1984. Stephen Hill, Heartland, Vermont, Plainfield, New Hampshire, in the Connecticut River, July 1986. Barbara Agnew, Heartland, Vermont, January 10th, 1987. Lynn Snyder, Rollinsford, New Hampshire, April 18th, 1987. Judith Whitney, Winchester, New Hampshire, November 8th, 1987. Pamela Webb, Franconia, New Hampshire, July 18th, 1989. Craig Lane, Peterborough, New Hampshire. Carrie Moss, New Boston, New Hampshire, April 24th, 1991. Rita Roy, Manchester, New Hampshire, May 20th, 1991. Teresa Reed, Plymouth, New Hampshire, September 6th, 1991. Lisa Began Wright, Laconia, New Hampshire, December 18th, 1991. Cheryl Peters, Morriston, Vermont, August 9th, 1993. Angela Ann Bluen, Derby, Vermont, May 30th, 1993. Mindy West, Manchester, New Hampshire, October 4th, 1998. Mary Morales, Vernon, Vermont, March 3rd, 1999. Louise Chaput, Pinkham Notch, New Hampshire, November 15th, 2001. Christina Lunsford, Nashua, New Hampshire, August 1st, 2004. Gone but not forgotten. And it's just very, very tragic that there are this amount of just missing persons and murders, unsolved murders in this area. Now, obviously, other areas have their concentration as well. I'm not downplaying that in any capacity, and I'm also not downplaying statistically there could be far more people murdered in cities, but it seems bizarre that there's these pockets in these New Hampshire areas where there's just this amount of people that have gone missing or have been murdered and their murders are unsolved. And there's actually even more. I'm sure researchers, this was just what was posted. There's actually even more and a lot more. I'll go over one more, and that's Christopher Gray. And this was another murder in Haverhill, New Hampshire, 2008. 2 people were arrested Thursday after the body of a Vermont man was found Wednesday night in Haverhill. Timothy Smith was charged with second-degree murder, and Anthony Howe was charged with hindering apprehension. The body of Christopher Gray of Groton, Vermont, was found on Lime Kiln Road in Haverhill. He had been reported missing on Wednesday. Also, a third person was arrested. 17-year-old New Hampshire woman has been arrested in connection with the stabbing death of a developmentally disabled Vermont man. Gray, 25, of Groton, Vermont, had died of multiple stab wounds. He was found at a mobile home in Haverhill, shared by Timothy Smith and Anthony Howe. Smith has been arrested on 1 count. Howe, 18, was arrested on account of hindering apprehension of prosecution. Smith, who worked at Walmart with Gray, is being held without bail. So this isn't obviously an unsolved case, but he was reported missing, and then he's found murdered in Haverhill. So it just goes to show that there's a lot of crime in the area. Some would say an unusually high amount of crime. And with these numbers, just the sheer numbers of the people I just listed, again, going back to the point I made before, statistically, obviously, all of them can't be at the hands of one serial killer or one person. But just after everything gone over today, again, it may be possible that 1, 2, 3, or maybe more are the result of the same killer or not, or just simply that different killers might know each other and be aware of each other and these crimes if they bragged about it, or other individuals who somehow have knowledge of these cases and missing persons might possibly intersect law enforcement involvement or otherwise. But it's all very, very tragic, all very, very suspicious. But Maura Murray and Brianna Maitland are not the only individuals to have gone missing, and not even close to the only individuals that have gone missing with their cars abandoned in similar circumstances. That's the real point here. So despite law enforcement claims that these are unique, isolated incidents, not really. Not from the numbers we're looking at here. So everyone out there, I hope you found another episode of MINDSHOCK True Crime interesting. Some of these obviously do not relate to Maura Murray. Others just in close proximity. There might be several degrees of separation, but possibly some kind of links in the Maura Murray case. If you found this podcast interesting and informative, feel free to donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help us get out more episodes, not just in this podcast series, not just in all of these other cases, but in missing persons cases as well. Awareness is what keeps cases in the public image, which can lead to them getting solved and some kind of well-deserved closure for friends and family of the missing. You can also like this podcast episode and share it to help with that awareness. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come in so you're notified when new podcasts are released. And you could also peruse our ever-growing back catalog. You can check us out Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.